Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's just gone 6:30, so we'll make a start of tonight's Rushcliffe Borough Council Planning Committee meeting. For our visitors in the room tonight, just got a member walking through the door, so I'm just starting. No, it's okay. I think the traffic's a bit bad here and there. For our visitors here tonight, I'm Councillor Richard Butler, the Chairman of the committee. To my left is Councillor John Stockwood, who is the Vice Chairman of the committee. To his left is Mrs. Soul, who is the Borough Solicitor, and to her left is Mrs. Coop, who is one of our Democratic Services officers. And to my right is Mr. Pegram, who is Service Manager for Communities, and to his right is Mrs. Dodd, who is an Area Planning Officer. So that's just so you have an idea as to who we are. And the rest of the colleagues are members of the committee. Before we go any further, I have to read a note about recordings. The Openness of Local Government Bodies Regulations 2014 allows filming and recording by anyone attending a meeting. This is not within the Council's control. Rushcliffe Borough Council is committed to being open and transparent in its decision making. As such, the Council will undertake audio recording of meetings which are open to the public, except where it is resolved that the public be excluded, as the information is being discussed is confidential or otherwise exempt. And in order to enable the recording, please use the microphones at all times when speaking. And I'll explain as the evening goes on as how the system works on that. So we'll go into the start of the meeting. Any apologies for absence of substitute members, please?
We have apologies from Councillor Clark, and we have Councillor Cumberlack as a substitute. We have apologies from Councillor Mayles, and that's Councillor Donoghue as a substitute. And we've got apologies from Francis Purdue-Horan. And we have Councillor Hetherington as a substitute.
And Councillor Smith, yes.
Please. I haven't managed to find a substitute, but Councillor Bushman gives his apologies.
Okay, right. Okay. Apologies, Councillor Bushman. Okay, got that. Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest under the Code of Conduct and or under the Planning Code? Anything to declare? Yeah, Councillor Stockwood, please.
I declare an interest in the item for 48 Hill Drive, and I'll be leaving the room, which is 1802226 FUL. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And also for the second item on the agenda, I will be handing the chair over to Councillor Stockwood because I'm the ward member for the ward concerned, so I won't take part in that part of the meeting. So we'll go on to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 15th of November. Hopefully everyone's seen a copy. Are we? Sorry, Councillor Jones, I didn't see you. Yeah.
I'll be speaking on item 18/02185.
Yes.
And I will absent myself for that item and
understood. I'm sorry I missed you out on that. I was aware, but I should have mentioned it. So sorry about that. So we'll go on to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 15th of November. Or for members who are here, are they correct? And would you like me to sign them as being correct? Thank you. I have to initial them as well, don't I? Right, thank you for that. So we now move on to the main reason for being here this evening, which is tonight's planning applications, and we have a few to discuss. And the first one tonight is Trentside Club, 32 Wilford Lane, West Bridgford, and this is a demolition of a former Trentside social club building and construction of residential apartment development with 34 units. And Mr. Pegram, you're leading us through this, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, yes, the application relates to what is currently the Trentside Club. You'll see a photograph in a minute of the building which sits roughly in that location. The site is located between the Rivermead flats, which I'm sure members will be very familiar with, and a relatively new development to the west of Poppy Close, with Wilford Lane at the bottom here. The Trentside Club itself has been used as a social club. It's also had some uses on the site which have prompted enforcement investigations, but as you'll see from the photographs in a moment, Chairman, the property I think now is vacant and the site is unused. That's the aerial photograph of the site. So the site is the area outlined in red, as I'm indicating. The Trentside Club sits at the far northern end of the site, adjacent to the Riverside Walk, with Rivermead Flats to the east and Poppy Close to the west. That's looking along Wilford Lane, generally in an easterly direction. You can see just about here is the entrance into Poppy Close, and then the frontage of the Trentside Club before you get to the Rivermead Flats, which you probably just see between the trees there. Moving closer in, so these are the new properties on Poppy Close, and the site is next to that between Poppy Close and Rivermead Flats. You'll see there are a number of trees on the site. A large number of those are subject to tree preservation orders, and the majority of those are shown on the plans to be retained as part of the development proposals. Moving closer in then, and you can now pick up the old Trentside Club at the back, and looking head on to the site. This area, you'll note this site was built up when the development took place as part of the flood mitigation works. The Trentside Club is at a slightly lower level here. Proposal is to build the blocks of apartments on effectively platforms to lift them as part of the flood mitigation works. Again, looking towards the Rivermead Flats, again there, and then now looking back in an opposite direction more or less across the front of the site to the properties on Poppy Close. That's now stood backing the site, looking opposite. There's a residential street opposite. That's the hotel premises on the corner. So the site again is just over the right shoulder of the photographer in that shot. And then inside the site, looking at the building which is proposed to be demolished. As you can see, it is now boarded up and vacant. And then looking again in a generally easterly direction towards the Rivermead Flats. Stepping back closer to Wilford Lane, again looking down the site, you'll see that much of the site has got hard surface car parking with an access road. There is an area of greenery at the front. Most of the trees are generally along the roadside boundary and down the boundary with Rivermead Flats. There are a couple of trees within the site itself. That's now looking west towards Poppy Close. Effectively, that is the gable end of one of the properties. Between those properties is parking areas, and then that is the back gardens in this area to the property here and to this one here. Again, just looking across at a slightly different angle at those properties. And then standing with the back to the Trentside Club, looking back towards Wilford Lane and the property which fronts Wilford Lane on Poppy Close. Now looking again across the front of properties in Poppy Close. So this was the parking area I referred to between the two blocks. And you can see the Trentside Club there with Rivermead Flats beyond. And then again turning slightly around, looking across different angle at the properties again on Poppy Close with the application site in the background. This is taken from, I think it's first floor of one of the flats within Rivermead, looking towards the current Trentside Club. This is one of the residents who made representations on the application, obviously concerned about potential impact of the block in this location on the amenities. And then that's looking from the balcony of that property, and you can see there's a substantial hedge along the boundary and parking down the side of the Rivermead. Again, looking across from Rivermead, now sat, this is stood in front of Rivermead on the river side of it, looking at the end of the Trentside Club. And then standing on the flood defence wall, again looking generally westerly along the riverside path. You can see the Trentside Club there with Rivermead here. Some photos taken from the opposite side of the river to give you a wider context of the area. You can see the sort of scale of development in the area here, and Poppy Close with the Trentside Club in the middle. And a sort of panoramic view picking up the McCarthy and Stone development, Rivermead, and moving it along the river. It is, I think, it's slightly bent, I will say, because of the way the panoramic view is reproduced. And again, picking up a bit further to the west as part of that panoramic view. So this is the existing site layout showing the position of the Riverside Club, the Trentside Club. You can see the trees, the majority of the trees are towards the Wilford Lane end of the site on the boundaries. Some on the western side of the access road in. And if I zoom in here, probably easier. This is showing the existing relationship. Sorry, I go to the top one. So you've got the Poppy Close properties. That's Rivermead in the background with the Trentside Club there. And then looking, that's the Poppy Close properties, Trentside Club, and part of the Rivermead development there. Again, I need to zoom in, bear with me, Chairman. So again, you saw in the photographs, but that obviously just gives you a relationship or the context of the site with the neighbouring properties. That's looking obviously from the riverside. That's looking from Wilford Lane. And then that's again looking across with Trentside Club here and Rivermead in the background. Here we go again, sorry. So the proposal, Chairman, is to demolish the existing Trentside Club that sits in that position. Proposal involves the construction of 2 blocks of apartments, providing 34 flats, 10 one-bedroom apartments, 23 two-bedroom apartments, and 1 3-bedroom duplex apartments, with 43 parking spaces. The original proposal as submitted included part of the block in this area. That has been omitted through negotiations to reduce the impact on the Rivermead flats. As you saw, they all have windows and balconies down this side looking towards the application site. The block here would range, bear with me, Chairman, I'll just get my aid memoirs. So the block at the front of the site would range from 2-storey in this position up to 6-storey for the bulk of the block. And the one at the front, closest to Wilford Lane, again would be 2-storey in that section, rising to 3 and then up to 4-storey. One of the issues which has been looked at, Chairman, as well as protecting the amenities of existing residents, we do have to have regard for the amenities of future occupants of the development. Environmental health officers did raise some issues about noise from Wilford Lane. There have been some amendments to the scheme to provide glass screens around terraces and around balconies to try and reduce the impact of noise, and the environmental health officer is now satisfied with those measures subject to conditions. As I say, proposal is for 43 parking spaces arranged around this access road and turning area. Again, we are about 250 metres from the air quality management area, and the environmental health officer encouraged, he said the developer should be encouraged to provide electric charging points. We believe that that's more essential than an encouragement, Chairman, and we have agreed with the applicant the wording of a condition that would see certainly the infrastructure installed, so that if residents on demand wanted an electric charging point, it would be easier to install at a later date. And the condition does also require a number of electric charging points to be installed at that early stage. Again, just showing the elevations of the block, Chairman. I have to say that the elevations are not very inspiring, they're a bit uninspiring. Obviously, it is a contemporary design. The plans show photovoltaics on the roof. Obviously, on the riverside, taking full advantage of the view over the river with balconies and full height glazing. In terms of the layout, Chairman, I won't go into too much detail here. I gave you the breakdown in the number of apartments. The 3-bedroom duplex apartment is in that location. The blue ones are the 2-bedroom apartments, and I think it's a sort of a light green colour, are the 1-bedroom apartments. And you can see what's not reflected in those elevations is the building on the riverside does have this stepped effect, which will be brought to life in a moment when I show you the sort of the illustrations of the development in place, effectively. Again, that's the block at the front. So again, the light blue ones are the 2-bedroom apartments, and the 1-bedroom apartments here. That shows you, Chairman, an indication of the context of the development in relation to the neighbouring properties. So the top elevation is stood within the parking area, effectively, looking towards the, I guess you'd call it the back of, I don't know, back or front of the apartment block closest to the river. Rivermead Flats here, Poppy Close here. You'll see this lighter area of shading. That is effectively the platform that the buildings would be built up onto as part of the flood mitigation works. The image below shows you the relationship from the riverside of the development, and then this one at the bottom shows you the relationship of the development at the front, closest to Wilford Lane, with Poppy Close, Rivermead, and obviously in a fainter pen the block at the other end of the site there. Bottom image shows you effectively a relationship between the 2 blocks on the site with Rivermead in the background. This is an example. Some of the parking spaces under the trees would be provided with a carport to protect the cars from sap falling from the trees, that type of thing. So the proposal is a carport structure of this type of nature. And then again, these are the images which I suggested might bring the scheme to life a bit more, providing a bit more relief in it and a bit more interest. So you can see the way the block steps along effectively between the 2 frontages of the neighbouring developments. There is a requirement to maintain an 8-metre area between any built development and the defence works, so that if there's a need to maintain those defence works, they can get in and effectively with equipment and machinery to do that work. Decking obviously is removable, so they've respected that requirement by stepping the building back, keeping it 8 metres back from this defence wall. That's another angle, again picking up Rivermead with the stepped block and the block at the front. And then looking from Wilford Lane back the other way, so that's the block closest to Wilford Lane, Poppy Close, Rivermead, and the block closest to the river. Again, just a slightly different angle of that sort of image. These are drone pictures provided by the applicant, Chairman. So they show an elevated position looking at the sort of context of the area. You can see the trees, the amount of existing hard surfacing within the site. And then turning around looking the other way. And then one taken from across the river looking back towards the site with the Trentside Club there. Chairman, clearly the site is in a highly sustainable location. It's within the principal urban area of West Bridgford, close to the city. Has good connectivity, good access routes. It is within an area which is shown as flood risk 3 on the Environment Agency flood maps. So clearly the application had to be accompanied by a flood risk assessment and also an evacuation plan in the event of a breach of the defences. The flood zone 3 designation doesn't take into account the defences. if you apply the defences to the flood risk, it does drop it into a lower category, but still within an area at risk of flooding, and certainly at risk if there was a breach or an overtopping of the defences. Hence the need for the flood risk assessment and the evacuation plan. Part of that evacuation plan includes a raised footpath along this side to take you back to Wilford Lane, where any residents could seek refuge on higher ground. I think clearly, Chairman, the issues that are most pertinent to the consideration of this one is the scale and amount of development that is proposed, impact on the amenities of neighbouring residents. As I mentioned, there is an issue about the amenities of future occupants of the site, and there's also clearly the flood risk issue. It is a development of 34 units, so it does breach our triggers for Section 106 contributions. However, Chairman, the scheme has been subject to a viability appraisal, which we have had independently assessed by a viability expert. The upshot of that, Chairman, is that the scheme cannot deliver the full range of Section 106 contributions that we might expect from it. The main ones that were requested was primary and secondary education from the County Council. There was no request from any contribution from the CCG, and clearly there is an affordable housing requirement. The scheme was found to be viable, Chairman, making a contribution in the region of £136,000, which would not cover all of the Section 106 requirements of the site. Therefore, Chairman, we have taken the view that given it's a priority of this council to deliver affordable housing, we would direct the total of that contribution towards providing affordable housing off-site. Chairman, it is a challenging scheme. It is obviously quite a high-density scheme. It has been looked at very carefully, and your officers have come to the conclusion that we would support the application. The recommendation, as officers I should say, the recommendation, obviously there is a Section 106 required, so the recommendation is that the Executive Manager of Communities be authorised to grant permission subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement for the contributions I mentioned previously. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Now, we have speakers for this item from our visitors and also a local ward member. So our first speaker tonight is Mr. Anderson, who is the applicant. The way it works is we sit at the chair there. You have up to 5 minutes to talk to us. It's a one-way, it's not two-way dialogue. And as soon as you're ready, press the right-hand button, red light will come on, and the clock will start counting down. And if you're running at 5 minutes, we have to stop you. Okay, so whenever you're ready, if you make a start, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Richard Anderson of MRP and I represent the applicant. I would like to address three main aspects of the scheme. The first is site context, scale and massing. The scheme has been designed to take advantage of its location by the River Trent by maximising views of the river and the park beyond for the benefit of the residents. Sites which offer such opportunities are rare and we believe should be celebrated. The design seeks to respond to tall 3.5-storey housing on one side and a large 7-storey flatted block on the other side by providing a stepped profile from low to high. This is a common architectural technique to provide visual continuity and to make sense of the context. However, there is a more fundamental point to this design. Objections have been made to the scheme on the grounds of its height and massing. It is said that a housing scheme would be more appropriate. However, the site is bounded on one side by the continuous wall of a 7-storey apartment block, with habitable rooms overlooking the site down its entire length. Any lower-rise scheme of family housing would face the problem that it would be completely dominated and overlooked by this block. With respect, we do not believe that the design of such a scheme would work for the residents, with residents of the neighbouring block looking out of their windows onto the gardens of family houses below. Our scheme seeks to address this issue by responding positively to the massing of the Rivermead block rather than being subservient to it. The family housing on the neighbouring Poppy Close site did not suffer from this overlook issue. In addressing this issue, we need to be sensitive to the residents of Poppy Close. This is achieved by ensuring that the building profile adjacent to Poppy Close is low and steps up only as it moves away from that site. The first 2 steps on each block are actually lower than the ridgeline of the Poppy Close houses, and only the 3rd step is higher. In the case of the block next to Wilford Lane, the height of the 3rd and final step is only just above the ridge height of the neighbouring houses. In the case of the Riverside block, whilst it is taller at its third and fourth steps, it presents itself to the flank elevations of the Poppy Close houses adjacent to it. And these steps are 21 metres away from the nearest Poppy Close house flank wall. All of the above has been done with full consideration of BRE sunlight and daylight good practice, and a positive report has been submitted with the application. In addition, the number of proposed habitable rooms which address Poppy Close is minimised as far as possible, and those windows which are proposed have etched glass to a height of 1.7 metres to avoid overlook. All of the above has been done through extensive consultation with the Planning Authority, including a comprehensive pre-application consultation period, and where we have been asked to make changes, we have made them. The second issue I would like to address is housing need. An objection has been raised that what is required in the area is family housing. However, a scheme of 171 family houses is being built within half a mile of the site. In addition, these apartments are likely to appeal to so-called empty nesters, downsizing from houses now too large for their needs. In 2016, an RICS report estimated 2.1 million such family houses in the UK, which could be released to the market if appropriate alternative accommodation were available. The lack of such accommodation in the UK is a contributor to housing shortage. Whilst other such schemes nearby target such buyers, notably by McCarthy and Stone, these schemes do not appeal to everyone. And this development provides an attractive alternative. In fact, it is likely that this scheme will release more family houses to the market than could be built on the site. The third issue is traffic and parking. The National Planning Policy Framework makes it clear that only sites generating significant amounts of traffic movement should be required to produce a transport assessment, and national guidance suggests that schemes of less than 50 residential units are not considered significant. This policy is very clear, and our scheme falls below that threshold. As regards parking, the number of parking spaces has been calculated with reference to the document Residential Parking Research for Nottinghamshire, in accordance with the consultation process with the Highways Authority. 43 car parking spaces is the amount required by this document, and NCC have accepted this provision. The scheme is therefore policy compliant. Meeting this country's chronic housing shortage will require a balance to be struck between the interests of those who currently have housing and those who do not. We believe that this scheme has achieved that balance via a very extensive consultation process of over 18 months, stretching back to the pre-application submission in 2017, and our willingness to make a large number of changes to address concerns. I would therefore respectfully recommend it to the committee for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Just within your 5 minutes as well. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Anderson, sorry, I'm just reading my notes here. So our next speaker now is Councillor Phillips, and you're the ward member, or one of the ward members for the ward. And again, you have up to 5 minutes. As soon as you're ready, please.
Okay. I'm concerned about the number of apartments being proposed for this site. 43 parking spaces for 34 apartments are totally inadequate. During busy periods, overnight, this section of Wilford Lane already resembles a car park, as vehicles are parked anywhere they can, including on pavements. Parking will overspill onto Wilford Lane, Poppy Close and Rivermead Flats parking areas. A turning circle planned will become used for car parking too. This will result in vehicles having to reverse onto Wilford Lane, which is a serious safety concern. The Rivermead Flats have always looked out of place on Wilford Lane. They seem to have set a precedent in recent years for more apartments and developments of an unacceptable height on the lane. If this development is allowed, it would be too overbearing on the properties on Poppy Close, likely to cause shadowing and a loss of natural light in these properties. The properties will be a less attractive proposition as they will be overlooked regardless of the part frosted glass to a height of 1.7 metres proposed. The Trentside development would be more appropriate if the properties were similar to those on Poppy Close. If the development is passed, what measures will be put in place to control the noise and vibration from pile driving during construction? Properties have already been damaged due to pile driving from the 171 Linden Homes site just a few hundred metres down the lane. How will trees with TPOs be protected during construction as their roots stretch far and wide? You only have to look at the amount of objections to this application and any application that is received for Wilford Lane, and they all say the same thing. It would add further congestion to the area. It will add to the already poor air quality in the area. It will create more access problems on and off the lane. Safety concerns. There are 2 large schools just off Wilford Lane. Thousands of children attend these schools, and the lane gets severely congested during start and end of the school day. Wilford Lane is too narrow, and we just keep approving more and more developments that just keep adding to the serious congestion and safety concerns. The definition of lane is narrow road. The Highways Department have raised no objection, and they just keep rubber stamping every Wilford Lane application. All the recent and future developments are just adding to the problems. There is a serious traffic impact due to these developments being approved. Although each one in its own right might not seem like much, when you add them all together, they are. Noise and disturbance is an issue, as vehicles trying to travel along Wilford Lane have to negotiate the many parked vehicles that have overspilled from properties with inadequate parking spaces. When are the residents of Wilford Lane going to get a break? There are a number of pockets of land along Wilford Lane that at some point in the future are going to be developed. Before we approve any more, we need to fix the problems and agree the type of developments that are appropriate. They all put additional traffic onto the lane, so we should be looking to find a way of taking traffic off it. Restrict the road to vehicles of 7.5 tonnes and straight away, it would ease traffic flows and improve the air quality. We need to find a compromise and work together if we are to continue to develop land on Wilford Lane. As it stands, I object to this application on the following grounds. The development is overbearing. It will create overshadowing to Poppy Close properties. It will add further to the traffic impact on Wilford Lane. It will create safety concerns from random parking and potential vehicles having to reverse onto Wilford Lane.
Thank you very much. That's well within the 5 minutes, so thank you for that. So we heard from Mr. Anderson, who was explaining, or speaking on behalf of the applicant, explaining about the scale, context and massing thoughts, and the consideration given to neighbours, and also the housing need we have, and refer to the traffic and parking queries and solutions. And Councillor Phillips also picked up, is objecting based on parking, traffic, overbearing for neighbouring properties, impact on Wilford Road, loss of light and construction worries, pile driving, etc. Would you like to pick up on any of those, please?
Yes, Chairman, I'll just work through some of those.
Quite a few to go through.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Rapidly writing notes here.
I may sort of hop around those issues, not necessarily in the order they were
No, that's
raised. If I can find the right image I'm looking for. Chairman, just in terms of the issue of overlooking, in part, you probably need, as decision makers, to consider the layout of the site. So in terms of the front block, you'll see from the plans and you saw in the photographs, the front block doesn't project forward of what is effectively the rear elevation, or I don't know if you call it, I'm still not sure if that's the front or the back, but we'll say that elevation facing the river doesn't project beyond the rear of the properties in Poppy Close, and this is the main amenity area for those properties. Photographs I looked at earlier confirm that that's a blank elevation and that's a blank elevation, no windows in those elevations. This, as you saw in the photographs, is the parking court between those two blocks. And then the front block here again stands clear of that rear garden. Yes, it's adjacent to the rear garden of this property. If we go to the elevations, there was concern about overlooking. Windows in the side elevation of the blocks are limited, and this is the elevation of the Riverside block closest to Poppy Close. So they're limited to those slit windows, which would be obscure glazed up to a height of 1.7 metres, and then the other windows step away from the boundary. Similarly, on the other block at the front, again, these are the windows which are closest to Poppy Close and would be obscure glazed. Members will have to themselves judge and consider what the impacts of this development are in terms of overshadowing and overbearing impacts that were mentioned. Clearly, the developer, it's probably not the best image to use, but the developer, as you heard, has tried to respect the impact on those neighbouring properties by stepping the blocks. So again, if we zoom in, and this is obviously one of the considerations your officers have had to sort of look at. If we look at this block, this is the block closest to Wilford Lane. That is the dwelling which sits closest to Wilford Lane, and you can see that the first two elements of that building closest to the boundary are actually lower than the neighbouring building. It's only when you step up to the highest part of that building, away from the boundary, that it's actually higher than that property. Similarly, at the other end of the site, the river frontage block, again, this is lower than the blocks here. This is roughly level. I'll come back to this point though, Chairman, and clearly in terms of any overbearing impacts, this is the parking area in front of those properties, not their private amenity area. There was concern, Chairman, that there was insufficient car parking and there's highway impacts associated with the development in terms of congestion on Wilford Lane. You know what's coming. Highways do not object. It has been looked at. They are satisfied with the visibility displays from the development. They're satisfied with the number of parking spaces. In fact, I was talking with the highway engineer earlier to just check some details. In terms of census information, typically, Chairman, car ownership is at 0.8, which would suggest that the parking that's provided in this instance is generally acceptable. It's more than one per unit, so it provides for a level of visitor parking or other parking. I hear what the ward councillor's concerns are about the potential for vehicles to be parked elsewhere in the reddy brown coloured area, which is the access and turning area, and the impact that might have of vehicles possibly reversing onto Wilford Lane. Chairman, that is somewhat speculation. We couldn't justify refusal of an application on something which we may not be able to evidence in an appeal situation. I know there is concern about pile driving, Chairman. It's only too close to home. We have experienced it with the site at the rear, and as members may be aware, we did take action on that site to minimise the impacts of the pile driving. I don't know what the foundation detail would be here. There are other developments which have taken place along Wilford Lane, haven't necessarily necessitated pile driving. However, Chairman, we are recommending a condition 16, which is a construction management statement that would provide information to that effect. Protection of trees was mentioned. You can't actually see it on these plans on the screen, Chairman. It's a bit too faint, but this has obviously been looked at very carefully, and that goes fuzzy, I do apologise. It's been looked at very carefully by our landscape officer. You would have seen that there is already a certain amount of hard surfacing on the site in terms of the parking and access road. The root protection zone of the majority of the trees just clips the edge of the building effectively. Your tree and landscape officer is satisfied that the development could take place without causing undue harm to those trees, subject to conditions. Condition 4 does deal with tree protection. And if I just go through the issues, I think, Chairman, that probably covers all the points that I wanted to respond to. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Pegram. So now we come to discuss, for the committee to discuss the application. So the first name on my list is Councillor Jones. First indicated speaker, please.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, the principle of development on the site goes without question. I have a number of questions and a number of views. In the report, I mean, you mentioned that car provision for this sort of size of flats would be 0.8, I think. But the report in some places says there's no cycle provision, and then in another place says there's 14 cycle stands. That's not been mentioned, but I noticed there's cover for some cars. Would there be cover for the cycle stands? And where are they? I mean, I really struggle with providing only 136,000 or whatever it is, which is half an affordable house. That doesn't seem to me. I still question however much you say experts have looked at the sums. And I have severe doubts about the noise issue off Wilford Lane. And I notice in paragraph 24 on the top of page 20, there's talk about overheating and ventilation has been discussed in general terms, but detailed assessment and design needs to be carried out. And I would have thought we should have had that before any approval, not after it. The other thing that concerns me, well, there's two things that concern me about the design. One is Mr. Pegram's referred to having removed part of the 6-storey block, which is nearest to Rivermead. And Rivermead obviously isn't the most attractive building on Wilford Lane. But there are residents there and there are windows looking onto the site. And what really bothers me is this 6-storey high bit that is still left, which faces the windows on Rivermead. And I think, to me, that's more of a concern than to the side. So I'm not at all happy about that. There is the other issue about the design of the place, because in paragraph 20, the Conservation and Design Officer talks about a very stilted response to constraints which result in a form and character which has little direct relationship to other buildings within the vicinity. And then in paragraph 21, he talks about, at the end, a very different to the more muted contrast of the elevational drawings, but the over-reliance on muted greys and the relatively limited contrast between the various proposed materials could result in a visually monotonous scheme. So when I saw the pictures that you presented, it does really, the design of it doesn't look at all impressive. It looks like within a few years will look like another Rivermead. And obviously the Conservation Design Officer had concerns. So I'm not particularly happy about those aspects of the application, although I accept that that development is needed on the problem with the flats. It's just that the appearance of them, the cycle provision and the height of that block adjacent to Rivermead, that I wouldn't be happy with that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jones. Would you like to come back on any of those, the cycle covers, and also the reference to the query about the heating,
Yes, Chairman.
overheating, and the impact on Rivermead in particular, but also the overall design, colours versus greys, etc.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. If I can just pick up in terms of the Conservation and Design Officer's comments first, I would stress this is not in a Conservation Officer, although the comments come from the Conservation and Design Officer. But he does provide some general comments on design. I would draw attention to the middle section of paragraph 21, Chairman, where he does say the site sits within the context of existing large block buildings to the east of 7 stories and smaller blocks of more modern residential building of 2.53 stories to the west. As such, the scale of the building proposed would not be out of context, and the proposed materials would be broadly comparable with the palette of materials used on the smaller residential blocks on the site. Clearly, he does have some concerns, Chairman, about the materials and how the final development may look. He's not concerned, to my mind, about the scale of those buildings, as is indicated by that paragraph. We have proposed a materials condition, Chairman, which clearly we would require submission of the details of the materials. That's condition 3, so that we could look at that and obviously ensure that we end up with an appropriate finish of materials. In terms of the cycle parking, Chairman, if I zoom in, it's only going to go very fuzzy, but effectively there are cycle racks proposed in this area here. So that's the cycle parking in there. you have to take my word for it to a certain extent. The covered parking spaces would be under the trees here, as I say, in part to protect those vehicles from falling sap.
Sorry, I asked whether the cycle stands were covered.
Certainly there's no indication.
People tend to sit on cycles,
Yeah,
whereas people sit inside cars.
yeah, no indication. There's no trees overhanging that part, obviously, but there's no indication at the moment, to my mind, that that would be covered, Chairman. It's just racks in front of the building. Just in terms of, I just want to clarify that point in terms of the level of parking, Chairman. It's the national census data which effectively provides evidence that overall across the country the general average car ownership is about 0.8. So it's not the standard that we apply in Nottingham, but it is maybe a relevant factor when we're considering the level of parking. Clearly the other aspects are that this is not a million miles from the tram, it's on a commuter route into the city, and clearly your officers and the Highway Authority felt that the level of parking being proposed was appropriate. The issue about ventilation and overheating, Chairman, again, it's not too clear on the plans if I zoom in, but effectively the Environmental Health Officer had concerns about this block, not so much this one because it's obviously well into the site. And you can see there are some terraces around the front, and there are also balconies on the front of that building. That has been addressed in part by provision of 1.8 metre glass screens around the terraces and 1.6 metre screens on the balconies above the above ground level. So that's clear glass. So clearly that will still be a usable area, but that glass will provide a barrier to noise. There was also noise information submitted that was assessed by the Environmental Health Officer, and ultimately, Chairman, he was satisfied, subject to condition of some of the finer details in terms of those measures. I think that's it, Chair. Oh, in terms of the impact on the windows in Rivermead, Chairman, just to give you those dimensions, it is approximately 26 to 27 metres from these windows to that block. And then at this point it's around about 11 metres, but again you can see that this is the part of the building that was taken out, so again it minimises in your officer's opinion the impact on any windows, so people along that section would still have sort of a view across the site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Jones, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, thank you. I certainly won't be supporting it. I mean, it just basically cycle stands should be covered in those circumstances. And however much you present it, there are nevertheless windows of flats in the end of Rivermead which are facing that 6-storey block. And within the distance you've described, I just don't think that's tolerable in terms of the amenity of the residents of that particular end of Rivermead. If it had been stepped back down on that side, that would have been less of a problem, but I think that's pretty poor. In terms of noise, I can take you to many houses where there's double glass between the resident and the road, and the noise is still pretty incessant from the road. So I don't know which expert thinks one little glass screen of that height would stop noise, but I don't believe that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Well, there are comments from experts, consultees, and we have to. That's what we're here for, is to interpret those comments. Now, have we got anyone else? Oh, Councillor Stockwood.
Thank you. If anybody else wants to indicate, I'll take your name, sir. Cumberlake, there we go. I just want to clarify the role of the planning system in a number of points. With regards to cladding on tall buildings, I just would like the planning of Ms Pegram, if you could clarify that although it's a fire regulations issue, the role of the planning system, we could perhaps be given informative that we do expect the highest standards of building regulations to be met with regards to any cladding on tall buildings. I think that the matter raised regarding noise, I know we're talking about the noise and how it affects the future residents of this property, but I thought perhaps that the issue being raised was the number of vehicles in the area, in the car park, and how that might affect adjacent properties, those traffic movements. So I think perhaps it would be helpful if we talked a little bit about the boundary between Poppy Close and the car park, and whether it's a tall wall with a fence on top. I think a point was raised with regards to a weight restriction on the road, which I think will probably be a highways matter. And although Councillor Jones talks about the sum of money being raised through the affordable housing contribution, it's my understanding that affordable housing is funded through a number of means, and it wouldn't be used for just half of one property, but a contribution to a number of properties. And if there was any indication, perhaps, of what might be occurring within the head of terms of the Section 106 agreement that's being developed, as to how that affordable housing contribution might be spent. So I think these are more questions around that would help the debate and clarification on some matters which I think are of importance and have been raised by other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwood. That's very helpful. So, can we comment on the cladding for high-rise specifications, and especially for high-rise buildings, and noise and the affordable housing?
Yes, Chairman. In terms of the cladding, Councillor Stockwood was quite right. It is a building regulations matter. It's not something that should be regulated by the planning service. I'm aware of perhaps where the concerns arise from in that respect, but it is a building regulations matter rather than a planning matter. Building regulations does cover issues of fire, safety, etc. In terms of the boundary treatment, Chairman, you can see here, I think when this development took place, there was a relatively new boundary treatment put down through there. The thing I would mention about potential noise to that development is that the buildings themselves would effectively be built up on platforms, but the car parking would be down at a lower level, and any noise would be largely screened by that wall and that fence. The other issue, clearly, Chairman, is the site has previously had a commercial use. It could start up in a commercial use again tomorrow, and that area could be used, if it was used as a social club again. Clearly, that area could be used as a quite intensive parking area in connection with the social club, with excuse me, sorry, Tim, comings and goings, obviously late at night potentially. So clearly there is a benefit here. It's a vacant site, it's becoming dilapidated, it's potentially an attraction for antisocial behaviour. There is a benefit in seeing this site developed in one form or another. Whether members believe that the current scheme is the correct one is obviously for them to determine. In terms of the Section 106 monies, Chairman, generally we collect those and it's then down to our strategic housing manager as to how that money is spent. But an example I can give you is that members may be aware that there are a number of garage forecourt developments which have been worked on between ourselves and the Trent Valley Partnership, Metropolitan Housing, and obviously some of the money that we have collected previously for off-site affordable housing has gone towards those schemes. So that's how it would generally be used to provide affordable housing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Right, my next indicated speaker is Councillor Cumberlack, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just a point of clarification. I've heard about the trees on the boundary between Rivermead and the development, but there's mention of, and Mr. Pegram alluded to it as well, a mature or a substantial hedge along that boundary. No mention is of whether that's to be preserved or protected, or whether it's to remain even.
Chairman, condition 4 does require a full arboricultural assessment to be undertaken. I'm not sure. The issue to some extent is that the site boundary or is it the Rivermead flat boundary? I think looking at the plans earlier, certainly the plans I was looking at indicated a hedge to be retained in this area. So the intention was certainly, again, as I said previously, the trees along the boundary and the vegetation, from my interpretation of reading the plans, would be retained, Chairman.
Councillor
If I can just come back, if we could condition that, because it in itself provides a bit of protection for the residents of Rivermead, it provides a softer focus for them.
That's a matter for members as decision makers, Chairman.
Yep. Okay. Councillor Hull, please.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things that Councillor Jones has actually stolen from me, but however I will mention. I'm very disappointed about the affordable housing. I mean, I know we ask for a certain percentage and it just seems very sparse indeed, but I understand your answer to that, Mr. Pegram. Secondly, as a cyclist myself, I'm very disappointed that the cycle racks seem to be a bit of an afterthought. They've had to remove something from the plan because of the overlooking of Rivermead, and then it looks like they've said, oh, well, let's stick a cycle rack in there. I must insist that it's covered. There's nothing worse than going down to your cycle in the morning when it's been frosty or rain and your cycle is wet through. So surely it wouldn't be too much to ask to actually have a clear perspex roof on it, like the like the car protections underneath the trees. I would like to ask for that. Also, could you just clarify on the question of noise? Now, it says that there's going to be glazing on the balconies and is that glazing above waist height, or is it just like a balcony, a clear glass balcony cover? Thank you.
Just rapidly looking up. So, but with regards to the cycle cover, yourself and Councillor Jones, I mean, if members are minded to, we can always put a condition on to request. So yes. So the fact that there's no reference to it in here, we are able to do that if we are minded to go down that route. Mr. Pegram.
Chairman, thank you. Yeah, just checking the original plans. There were cycle racks shown elsewhere on the site on the original plans before that corner of the building was removed. So I think it's been a slight rearrangement of the details there. In terms of the glazing, around the let me find the plan again. Do for now. So again, as I said earlier, the area here, the sort of patio areas to the ground floor flats, it would be 1.8 metre high clear glass, and on the balconies on this side of the building, it would be 1.6 metres above the level of the balcony, but it would be clear glass at that point. Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Is that helpful? Good. Councillor Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. I'd like to pick up on paragraph 9. Councillor Wheeler's comments, which were also echoed by Councillor Phillips in his presentation. And I know that Mr. Pegram will say we're dealing just with this application, but it does seem to me that the Borough Council should take an overview of the developments along Wilford Lane, because it's one after another, and they do have a cumulative effect, even if you can justify each one on its own particular merits. And, Chair, it's really, is the Borough Council going to do that? Secondly, just to echo the comments about affordable housing, the expert has looked at the viability of the scheme. Can Mr. Pegram confirm that one of the tests for the viability of the scheme is that the developer's profit margin is at 20%? Because, as we know, if those profit margins were less, much more affordable housing could be built. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. So the cumulative effect of development on Wilford Lane, and profit margins of developers, which I'm not sure.
I'm going to try and multitask here, Chairman.
Oh, right, okay, multitasking is always dangerous. But, It's part of the fascination of this committee. We get asked questions which really put everyone on their toes. So you might just have to bear with us a moment while
There's always one question
Yes.
I don't prepare for, Chairman. Yes. Right. In terms of the overview of development, I'll go as long-winded as I can on this while Mrs. Dodd finds the answer to the other one. Yes, the council has taken an overview of development within the borough. That is contained within the council's core strategy, Local Plan Part 1, which obviously seeks to concentrate the bulk of developments within or adjacent the principal urban area. So we have identified three strategic sites around West Bridgford that will provide a large proportion of the council's housing stock. However, Chairman, as is recognised in the plan, we do also rely to a certain extent on windfall sites to provide a degree of the housing stock. This site is a brownfield site. It would be classified as a windfall site. It's in a highly sustainable area. So no, we haven't looked at Wilford Lane, an overview of Wilford Lane. Clearly, yes, it has been the focus, and I'm very mindful and appreciative of the fact it has been the focus of a lot of development in recent months and years. But effectively, the overview is within the core strategy. And clearly, the core strategy seeks to focus the majority of development in or adjacent urban area, the principal urban area, i.e. West Bridgford. In terms of the affordable housing and the viability issue, just to assure you, Chairman, we don't take what the applicant submits on face value. We do have that assessed by an independent consultant. Yes, profit does form part of the consideration of viability. I think it changes. I must admit it changes, but I think the standard type, the sort of standard level of profit that a developer would expect is around about the 20% mark. And that is not just because he wants to make that much. He's obviously in the business of he's operating a business, so it has to be profitable. But the other aspect of that is that the banks will not lend a developer money unless they are satisfied they are going to get an acceptable return. And sometimes that return is set by the banks at around about the 20% mark. I don't know what it is in this instance unless we found it. Yes, it's the usual expected profit of 20% of the GDP. So clearly, yes, the profit is a factor. Viability these days, sadly, is a factor we have to take into account. Once upon a time, it wasn't relevant to planning. We didn't have to have consideration for it. But we do now. Schemes have to be deliverable. They have to be viable. But to reassure members, it has been thoroughly looked at by an independent consultant.
Right, thank you, Mr. Perry. Is that helpful, Councillor Edwards? Do you want to come back on that?
It's exactly the answers I'd written down beforehand, so it's kind of Mr. Pegram to confirm my thoughts. Chair, can I was minded to oppose this scheme when I came. I've been reassured by the locations of the two proposed blocks. And also by the aerial images of what those blocks might look like, both in terms of their location, the stepped nature, and the materials to be used. The scheme is far from ideal, but taking it on balance, this is a site that badly needs development. It's a big site. I accept the points that the developer made that it's not really a site that's suitable for family homes right under the aegis of Rivermead next door. I think that is a valid argument, and therefore, weighing things up during the evening, I'd like to move the recommendation for the executive manager.
Thank you,
plus a cover for the cycle sheds.
Yes, I sense that was about to come. Councillor Stockwood.
I'm willing to second the recommendation, but would like to see the arboricultural method statement explicitly protect the hedge. So I think what was being asked for as well. Exactly.
I'd agree with that.
Agreed by the members.
Thank you, that's very helpful. So we're just making a note.
Sorry,
Oh,
Councillor
sorry, Councillor
Smith,
Smith.
keep-
Sorry, yes.
It's a question for clarification, really. I think Mr. Pegram commented that the 0.8% car usage was related in some way to the national census,
Yes.
which presumably covers the whole country, including all the inner city areas where there isn't the requirement for cars so much because of better public transport. I would have thought in areas like Rushcliffe that it was somewhat higher, and that I am concerned about the lack of, I would have thought at least 1.5 per unit rather than 0.8, but presumably there's no other room to put any more cars. And there was also reference, I think my colleague on my right, Councillor Cumberlack, was wanting the hedge to be protected. My only concern with that is that it can only be protected, surely, if it's within the site and not belonging to Rivermead. Do we know who owns it? Thank you.
Chairman, again, one of those questions I can't give you a categoric answer to. As I say, the plans do show hedging to be retained along that boundary, although you'll see from that image on the screen, the parking spaces may require the trimming back of that hedge to facilitate the parking spaces. Councillor Edwards did, as part of, or was it Councillor Stockwood, as part of the motion and the seconding, did also ask that condition 4 included the protection of the hedge during construction. Again, that's not an unreasonable requirement to impose. In terms of the national census data, yes, that is across the country. However, I think it wouldn't be unreasonable to think that the car ownership in this area, particularly one-bedroom flats and two-bedroom flats close to the city and facilities, the level of parking is not considered to be unacceptable by your officers, and certainly, again, Highways didn't object on level of parking. They have.
Oh, you cynic, Councillor Smith.
Councillor James.
Councillor Jones.
Whilst I'd still oppose it on the basis of design and 11 metres from the windows of Rivermead, Mr. Pegram just said preserve the hedge during construction. I thought the wish would be that the hedge is preserved ad nauseam, not just during construction and then removed afterwards.
Could that depend on who owns the hedge?
In part, Chairman, yes. Yes.
Mr. Pegram, perhaps it would clarify that if I asked for condition 4 to protect the hedge during construction and any works, and condition 6, the detailed landscaping scheme, should the, looking at the development, there doesn't seem to be a lot of buildings on that side, so if there is a landscaping scheme that can ensure that some hedging appears on that side, if there's a problem, if it is not in the ownership of the applicant, then that way there would be a continued green strip, even if it's a very narrow strip in the sense of a hedge, on the eastern side. And I think in listening to the debate, we can see, and looking at the pictures on the screen, we can see that there is some scope there for a landscaping scheme that does continue to enable some green space within the applicant's control. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwood. Is that feasible?
Helpful at all?
And helpful in regards to condition 6?
In part, Chairman, although looking at the plans closer up, the parking spaces are very close to that boundary. So although the plan I'm looking at does show the hedge retained, it is going to need cutting back. There's no doubt. Otherwise, it's you're not going to get your cars in there. So there's going to need to be a degree of cutting back for that and for the bin stores. It seems to suggest that hedge straddles the boundary, so it is a moot point as to whether it's in the control of the applicant or whether it's shared or on Rivermead.
Okay, right, fine. Well, I think we've had quite. I hope colleagues will agree. We've had quite a good discussion on this. So, and we've had the recommendation moved and seconded, along with some additional conditions. as discussed. I think we're probably ready to go to a vote on this, if we're all ready to do that. No other comments. So we've got the notes of the additional conditions and the observations and comments. So I think we'll go to a vote. Can I have a show of hands for colleagues who are in favour of the application along with those additional conditions? Please show. And those against? 2. And any abstentions? No. So that's 8-2, I think. So permission is granted as per the report and as per the additional conditions. And also, Councillor Edwards, thank you. You've shown how well the committee works, because you said you were initially sceptical or against, but we've discussed it well tonight, and it's helped you come to your opinion. And I think all of us will be like that. You always have your doubts about applications. That's why we have the committee. So thank you for those comments. Right, we'll move on to our next application, and I'll hand over to my colleague for this one, Councillor Stockwood.
You all set? Second chairman, vice chairman. Soon to be replaced by robots. Yeah. I'm on tape again. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Although this is still looking at the plan from the previous one, I'm sure we're now moving on to planning application 1802462/FUL. Open space, Candleby Lane, Cotgrave Shopping Centre, Cotgrave. Mr. Pegram will present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, Vice Chairman. Just to begin, Chairman, just to clarify, the application is at committee because it is one of our applications, obviously, so it comes before committee for determination. Members will note there was a requirement to undertake some further consultation which arose during the processing of the application. That is with the Hot Pots, I think it's called Hot Pots Cafe that sits on the site, and the time period for comments to be received are the 18th of December. So clearly that's after this meeting. So you'll note that the recommendation is subject to no further representations being received by that date, which would effectively warrant reconsideration of the application. There are some late representations in the report which were circulated to members previously, and we've also now heard from the tenant who occupies the first floor of Hot Pots, the building that Hot Pots Cafe is in, not objecting. So clearly there is still an outstanding or potential for an outstanding comment from the tenants of the Hot Pot or the owners of the Hot Pot Cafe. Clearly, Chairman, any resolution tonight, we can't issue the decision until that time period has passed. The proposal relates to the shopping centre in Cotgrave. Members will be aware that this has been subject to significant redevelopment, remodelling of the shops, the construction of the multi-service centre in this area here. Part of that proposal does involve demolition of some of the buildings on the site, including the library, which sits roughly in this location, and also the police station, which sits in this position. The Hot Pots Cafe is here, and the current playground area is within the middle of the open space over here. So the proposal is to demolish the police station, which already has permission for demolition, and to level the ground and provide a children's play area there, and then re-landscape this area here. And you can see putting the footpath through to link in with the existing footpaths on the site. That's the existing. I'll come back to this, Chairman. Clearly, this is the most up-to-date plan we have, which was the development plan for the site. The aerial photograph does still include the properties on Scotland Bank, so this is clearly pre-development, this aerial photograph. Again, the site is outlined with the existing play area here and the site where the police station is currently located, and the proposal to replace that with the children's play area. That's looking along Candleby Lane, picking up the development. You can see the roof here of the multi-service centre and the shopping centre here. That's looking into the shopping centre, so the play area is currently over the right-hand shoulder of the photographer. That's again that's now looking towards the police station and where the play area would be. Again, that's now the police station here. Oh, so that's the police station there. That's the Hot Pots Cafe building. Canterbury Lane here, you can see there is a change in level between the site down to Canterbury Lane. Police station in the background there, which would be demolished. And then looking towards Canterbury Lane in the other direction, that's the existing play area, which is to be removed and landscaped. And then again, looking across at the Futures building on the opposite side of Canterbury Lane. So the application site is to the left here, just off the screen. And then again, just looking across the landscaped area of the shopping centre with the multi-service centre in the back. And then again towards the police station and the Hot Pots Cafe. So we've heard from the tenant in the first floor, yet to hear whether the tenant at ground floor wishes to make any comments. Again, this shows you the relationship of the site and the changes in level between Canterbury Lane, where the site is proposed, and the properties on the opposite side of the road. Again, a good picture to show that change in level. So again, the area is roughly around this area that's fenced. And again, the police station to be demolished with where the play area would go, and the footpath through to the shopping centre. That's just again looking across the road to the properties on Canterbury Lane. So the existing play area is to the left, proposed one is effectively here to the right, and looking into the shopping centre. That's the Hot Pots Cafe. That will be retained, and the play area will sit behind that property. So, Chairman, you've seen this plan again. It just shows where the existing play area is, the site of the proposed one, and the second one shows you with the play area removed, landscaped with a path through the middle. This does form part of the overall plans and the scheme for the Cotgrave Shopping Centre, and is before members with a recommendation to grant planning permission, subject to no further comments being received by the 18th of December, which raise any new issues other than those which have already been raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no public speakers according to public speaking scheme, so we move on to the committee debate. Councillor Edwards has indicated he wishes to speak.
Just a very quick point. In paragraph 25, this is to help me understand, it says that it'll need to include equipment and features which are, quotes, inclusive, unquote. I'd be grateful for an example of what that might be.
Well, it's an inclusive design included in play area equipment is such items as the basket swing, which is popular. They also do a new roundabout where you've got it's more like a bowl, and so because there's a rimmed out on the side, it helps children who are have a range of mobility interests. And the basket swing, rather than the straightforward swing, is something that can be used by children of different ability. And I think many play area companies now look to have inclusivity in a range of their equipment, because that's what people and councils and delivering for people want to see. But Mr. Pegram will. Oh, we're building those play areas. Anyway. Anybody else? Well, there we go then. Councillor Thurman's next, and Councillor Jones. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, this is all part and parcel, obviously, which we all know of the Cotgrave regeneration, and I'm quite sure this has been on some plan at some point. We've probably not noticed, but I have absolutely no objection to it, and I'd be happy to propose the recommendation.
Thanks very much. Do you have a seconder at this time? Councillor Cumberleck indicated first, but so I've got a validly moved motion, recommendation, from Councillor Thurman, seconded by Councillor Cumberleck, which is the recommendation as written on page 48. Mr. Pegram has indicated we speak, and then we've got two more speakers in the debate.
Chairman, just to draw to the attention of members, but particularly the mover and seconder, the late representations do include amendments to the conditions. So just wanted to check that the motion it's the omission of condition 6 and the rewording of condition 4. So just wanted to check that the motion included those recommendations. Thank you, Chairman.
Does the mover and the seconder approve of the changes to the amendments to recommendations as described in the late representations? Councillor Jones and then Councillor Donoghue is indicated to speak.
Yeah, I was going to say I was quite happy with it. I presume the new area is larger than the one it replaces. What I was less sure about was the relationship with whatever the building is to the north, there, and the circular area. Is that a circulation area? Yeah, and what is the building that you had your arrow on a minute ago? Yeah,
That's part of the town centre. There's a car park here as well. That's part of the town centre buildings. And yes, this is the sort of circulation area in front of the shops.
Yeah.
You're probably aware now as well that we have a business unit above the shops here.
Yeah.
So there's offices as well in that area.
So it's got good connectivity. Yes. Thank you.
And it's bigger.
Councillor Donoghue.
Oh, thank you. I'm really excited by the application. I'm familiar with the area. A good example of inclusive playground and equipment is the University of Nottingham. You know, the Lakeside Park has some good examples of equipment that could be used. One of the concerns I have is about the fencing or the perimeter of the play area, because as it stands at the moment, it's got quite an ugly green, sort of spiky, not very friendly perimeter. So I just wondered if any thought or consideration had been given to that in the final design yet.
Miss Pegram will tell you about. I think they've chosen a. It's a shorter hipped top. Well, Miss Pegram will now describe the fence.
Yes, paragraph 4, Chairman. Mrs. Dodd has helpfully pointed out for me it's a 1 metre high hoop-topped fence.
Yes.
So it will replace what's there at the moment.
Good thing. It should be about that height. With no further speakers, we now move to the vote on the recommendation, which has been moved with amended conditions. All those in favour? Against? Planning permission is granted subject to the representations being received by the 18th December that don't raise any additional planning issues and the amended conditions. Thank you very much. We now move on to the next planning application, which will be the Chairman, Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwood. Our next application is Hilltop Farm, Cliff Hill Lane, Aslockton. Construction of an area of construction of area of hard standing, and this is a retrospective application. Mrs. Dodd, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We have received a late representation for this item, Chairman, from the solicitor of one of the neighbours. This has been circulated to members and there are no further comments or conditions to add as a result. As the Chairman's described, the application is for an area of hard standing at an agricultural unit and it is made retrospectively. See from the red line plan here, this is the area of hard standing in question, which is 260 square metres, and it's at the rear of an existing agricultural yard and agricultural contracting yard. The aerial photograph gives you a little bit of context. The site lies at the end of a row of ribbon development along Cliff Hill Lane in Aslockton. So Cliff Hill Lane runs further to the south, more towards the village, and then, as you can see, as it goes towards the north, the end of the ribbon development there with the agricultural unit on the top. The aerial photographs obviously must have been taken a little while ago because there is an additional barn now in this area of the site. To the south of the site, immediately to the south, is a residential property and predominantly residential properties along Cliff Hill Lane. So if I take you through the photographs now, the first one is the front of the site. You can see there are two access points here into the site, which is over to the right-hand side of the photo. This line of hedges and trees marks the boundary with the neighbouring residential property. We're now standing on Cliff Hill Lane looking down into the application site, and a slight close-up there you'll be able to make out a concrete wall just along the back of the existing yard, and behind that is where the hard standing area lies. So again, this is that concrete wall marking the current edge of the site, and beyond that is the hard standing. The boundary here is with the residential properties and parkland to the south. This is the hard standing itself. It's a little bit difficult to make out on the photographs because, as you can see, it's an area of compacted hardcore or stone, and it is it sort of blends in with the fields there in terms of mud and such like that's on the area. I'm just looking out towards the fields to the rear of the applicant's agricultural holding, and then that shows you that hard standing a little bit more clearly there. You can just make out that the edge of it and where the edge of the hard standing ends and the field begins. A little bit more detail in terms of the boundary, which is a hedgerow, and then showing the extent of the hard standing towards this end of the site, towards where the barns are, which you'll remember from the aerial photo are to the northern side of the site. So, Chairman, the area has already been made to hard standing. It is a retrospective application. The applicant advises us it's used to facilitate the access between the existing yard and the field areas. It's also used for the occasional storage of farm implements. In terms of the hard standing itself, it's in connection with a rural activity, which is the agricultural use of the site. It's an established agricultural holding, and it's therefore considered an appropriate development for the open countryside, provided it doesn't have a significant adverse effect on openness. As I hope the photographs demonstrate, it is fairly well screened from public viewpoints, and also the nature of the hard standing is fairly indistinguishable from the fields surrounding it. On this basis, Chairman, the recommendation is to approve the application, subject to conditions on page 61, which do restrict the use of the site to ensure it is only used for agriculture. As I mentioned previously, there is an element of agricultural contracting that already takes place on the existing yard areas and within the barns there. What we seek to control is that this particular area of hard standing is only for the agricultural use. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dodd. We have three speakers on this item tonight. The first is Mr. Bacon, who is the applicant. Is Mr. Bacon here? Mr. Bacon, if you would like to come and sit at the seat. I'm not sure if you were here earlier on, but you have up to 5 minutes. It's one way, it's not a two-way discussion, just addressing the committee. As soon as you're ready, press the right-hand button, red light will come on, and you have 5 minutes, which will count down on here. Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nick Bacon, and I am the agent acting on behalf of the applicant. The application before the committee is not to change the use of the land, but is merely for the laying down of an area of hardcore to stop a gateway into a field becoming a quagmire, and is also to provide a small area of hard standing to store ploughs and other agricultural implements. It is perhaps important to note that the area of land, with or without the hardcore, can be used for these farming activities, whatever the committee decides tonight about the hardcore. I think the matter you therefore have before you and been asked to decide is whether the appearance of the hardcore constitutes harm to the open countryside or harms the amenity of the adjoining land. For both of these, we maybe need to consider the reality, which is that any area of hardcore like this in a field is quite likely to quickly resemble the same appearance and colour of the field due to mud being trafficked over the hardcore by the tractors. The hardcore will of course continue to serve its purpose even if it has a fine layer of mud on top. the case officer has concluded that this area of hardcore is not incongruous in an area of open countryside, especially bearing in mind that it is not in a prominent location. Regarding the neighbouring lands, this is parkland and as such has no residential amenity rights. As the case officer comments, any residential use of that land would indeed represent an unauthorised use. Cliffholm Mews, the neighbouring house, is about 50 metres from the application site and is screened from the hardcore area by dense planting. I ask the committee to conclude that the appearance of an area of probably mud-coloured hardcore that distance away will not in any way affect the residential amenity of the neighbours, especially taking into account the existing screening planting. Remember again, we are not discussing the activity on the land, but only the appearance of the hardcore. Thank you for your time. I'd like to think that the committee will come to the same conclusion as the case officer when he recommends the application for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bacon. That's well within your 5 minutes as well, so thank you for that. Our next speaker is Mrs. Bridge, who is an objector. Mrs. Bridge, if you're here. And the same again, up to 5 minutes as soon as you're ready. Press the right-hand button, please.
We are very concerned about the unapproved hard standing laid against our hedge and our garden curtilage. This 260 square metres of hard standing is next to another 515 square metres of concrete slab, which is outside the red line area of the large barn built in 2015 and is unauthorised and should be returned to grass immediately. We are also extremely concerned that the flagrant disregard the applicant has towards permitted development, as evidenced by his unlawful extension to the grain store and the muddied waters between what is and isn't agricultural activity, will continue to go unchecked as the planners seem to have no desire to prevent it. The main justification for the application is to store agricultural implements and to firm up boggy ground to assist access through a new set of gates. Sorry, tractors are made to go through boggy ground, and if it's an issue, site the gates elsewhere. As for the implements, there are now 5 barns on a 10-acre field. Surely the implements presumably are being moved to make room for the new dwelling and double garage, and the implements can be put inside the existing barns. They were last year. If not, we must assume that they are, and these are photos of the implements, outdated, rusty, or surplus to requirements. Why would we want the view from our grounds into open countryside to be spoilt by this eyesore? Don't forget, farm equipment could be combine harvesters, muck spreaders, all taller than our hedge. We do support the suggestion by the planners that conditions should be attached for it to be only used for agricultural purposes. However, given the applicant's cavalier attitude towards what is and isn't agriculture, we know this will be abused. The hard standing extends 90 degrees to Cliff Hill Lane and will be beyond the residential ribbon development of the houses into the open countryside, which shouldn't be allowed. The vehicles and implements are excessive for the site. Only 8 acres are farmed there, yet the applicant has 90 acres in Florborough, but all of his equipment is kept at this site. Why should we and walkers in Aslockton have to look at a pile of old equipment when they could be looking at farmland? Our amenity is being spoiled by the noise at all hours and the dust and fumes of vehicle movement along our fence line. This extra hard standing will provide further opportunity for them to make this worse. This is now the only entrance to the field, as the applicant closed a set of gates near to where his JCBs are garaged. Our concern is that the site until 2015 had strict demarcation areas where machinery used had to comply with strict hours of operation. As Mr. Pegram advised last time that we were here, between 8 AM and 6 PM and not on Sundays or bank holidays. The relocation of the gates next to this hard standing now blur which activity is taking place on the site, leading to increased noise and dust pollution. We have kept a log for the Environment Department for almost a year, which proves the applicant completely disregards these hours. The applicant's agent has tried to deflect attention away from this unauthorised hard standing by mentioning our amenity is not affected because it's next to parkland. 28 years ago, with full planning approval, the owner built a man-made lake, planted a variety of trees and built a summer house, which we are aware of because we have all the supporting documentation, and we still use the original architect. We maintain its beauty without help from outside contractors and gain great benefit and amenity from it. Aerial photographs show it as a green island within a sea of arable fields. The land and lake support many different wild animals and flora and fauna. The hard standing will have a significant negative effect on this landscape and its ecosystem. It's not the hard standing, it's what is on the hard standing. We're therefore asking you not just to rubber stamp this suggestion, but to please give it your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridge, and just within your 5 minutes as well, so thank you. And we also have the ward member who wishes to speak on this item, Councillor Mrs. Stockwood. You don't need me to tell you how to work the microphone, I'm sure.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with all the points raised by the neighbour's solicitor, who unfortunately is on leave at present, couldn't be here this evening. The late submission from the solicitor makes the point that the so-called parkland forms the garden area of the neighbour's property and is used as such. Regrettably, the business carried out by the applicant is expanding and has expanded quite considerably over the years since the neighbour bought the property. I also regret that the applicant takes no notice in the summer months of conditions set as to hours of operation. These may have been set some time ago, but surely with the expansion of the business there should still be observed so as not to impact on the enjoyment of the neighbour's home and garden. The machinery noise and power hosing down of not only the business owners' farm vehicles, but it contracts for several other farmers in the area too, causing substantial vehicle movements and disruption in the quiet lane, which is a residential area. The neighbour does wish for good relations with the business and has been hopeful of that being reciprocated. But this has been eroded over the years, and complaints are met with compliance for a short time, but it carries on again, time after time. If increased business is carried out, I too welcome condition 1, but it must be enforced. And I know that's not the planning thing, but it is worthy of mention this evening. Complaints should be followed up by the borough. It would also be really preferable for the hours of operating business to be shown on this particular application also, and it added as a condition, please, 8 AM to 6 PM, not on Sundays or bank holidays. The area of hard standing needs to be accurately shown before permission is granted. As has been mentioned, there are other hard standing areas. This is merely being added to the business. Aerial photographs show the correct position, and I have been informed that the planning department has actually seen these. There is plenty of room on the applicant's agricultural business grounds for vehicles to be parked away from the neighbour's boundary. The applicant farms only 8 acres here, but has 90 acres in a nearby village. Of course, we wish business in the countryside to flourish, but not in a highly residential area or to spoil the residential amenity of a neighbouring property. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwood. That's very helpful, and it sounds like you're losing your voice as well. So, like a lot of us at the moment. So we heard from Mr. Bacon, who is the agent on behalf of the applicant, who was telling us that it's not a change of use of land, and was explaining what the area is being used for. Mrs. Bridge is a neighbour who is concerned about what's going on, and also made comments about business activities that she disagrees with and is not happy about, and also hours of operations. And likewise, Councillor Mrs. Stockwood made similar comments, who's objecting to the application, and also pointed out that if we give planning application permission, we put conditions on about hours of operation, etc. Mrs. Dodd, would you like to pick up on those, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Quite a few points raised there, so I will try and go through them in a logical order. I think probably it would be helpful as if I explain a little bit more of the wider site history, because this was picked up on by a couple of the speakers. So if I just zoom in here, this area at the front of this area at the front of the site here, so there's a yard area and a barn building, were the subject of a permission in 1980 for an agricultural contracting business, and they are restricted. That area is restricted by hours conditions. The wider site is not restricted by those conditions, although the council is aware that that business has spread over the years. We have conducted robust enforcement investigations into these matters. I don't intend to go into them in detail in this committee. However, I would ensure members that this has been investigated. And I would remind members that we are at the moment only looking at this area of hard standing at the rear, and that this hard standing is to be used for agriculture rather than agricultural contracting. This is the reason for condition 1, which is clearly an enforceable condition. In addition to that history, there are the barns, which, as I say, there is actually one in this area which doesn't show on the aerial photograph. It's a more recent one. These have been done under agricultural permitted development over the years. We are aware that one of them is not in accordance, which is this one at the front here. However, this has been built more than 4 years and is therefore immune from action. In terms of history of the neighbouring site, as far as the council is concerned, this is Parkland area. The residential curtilage lies along this line here. The applicant, beg your pardon, the neighbours solicitor has made reference to this area being residential garden since 2006. We haven't been provided with evidence to demonstrate that through a certificate of lawfulness application. And so officers have considered it on the basis of Parkland. Chairman, we have had appeal decisions where inspectors have talked about residential curtilage, and where that is a large residential curtilage, that the importance in terms of amenity tends to be those areas closer to the house. And I think that's an important distinction to make when looking at where the actual built form is in relation to the wider area. And then finally, I'd just like to pick up on Councillor Stockwood's suggestion of a condition for hours of operation. My only concern that I would lay before members there is that this is obviously the access for the applicant onto their agricultural fields. Oh, let me just zoom. What have I done? And if you were to restrict the hours that this piece of hard standing could be used or accessed across, it could obviously prevent the applicant from accessing fields outside those hours, perhaps in harvest time when it might be particularly important to be able to get onto those fields, you know, at different hours. The agent has clarified this is primarily an access area, an area to prevent farm vehicles from sort of to transition between the yard and the muddy fields, although there would be some potential storage of farm implements as well. I hope I've picked up on everything there, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dodd. Yes, I think you have. I think we'll go into discussion now. The first name here is Councillor Cumberland. please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd point out that I'm a ward councillor for a very rural area where we have a lot of farming businesses. I would first of all ask the description of agricultural. In the recommendation, it is said that the location plan shall be used solely for agricultural purposes. Now, as I understand it from the application, this is for the storage of agricultural implements. And I think that recommendation should say that. And that this shall not be used in relation to the agricultural contractor's business. I think that should say, and not for motorised vehicles. I am concerned that farming in 2018 is on an industrial basis now for the production of food and should be viewed in the same way as we look at industrial units. I think we need to be very clear what we mean by our recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. So we want to, how do we describe agricultural purposes then, in effect? And you point out the industrial scale of farming nowadays. Mrs. Dodge, do you want to come back on that, please?
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of I think perhaps what you were getting at was the differentiation between the agricultural use and the contracting use. So in terms of the contracting work, we understand that is work that takes place either elsewhere on other farms or vehicles that are lent out. So when we talk about this being for the agricultural purpose, it is for the purpose of accessing this agricultural holding. In terms of motorised vehicles, clearly part of the reason for the hard standing is to allow motorised vehicles on and off the site. And I just wondered if Councillor Cumberlack perhaps meant more in terms of storage of vehicles, whether that's perhaps a point of clarification that's required, Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, I was referring to the storage of the motorised vehicles because the motorised vehicles will have to start up and warm up and create a nuisance for the storage of the implements, not the motorised vehicles.
Just making a note of that. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hull, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm focusing on paragraph 43, 44 and 45 on page 60, and I'm still not clear. I wonder if the officer could go back to the original site plan for me and indicate with her cursor exactly who owns... No, not that one, the coloured one. Go back. That's it. Right, now you've indicated that the area of trees between this particular piece of land that we're discussing and the neighbour is called parkland. So who owns that land? Who owns that? Is the neighbour's property, does it go round that parkland like that?
My understanding is that the land is in the ownership of the neighbour, the parkland area.
And that includes this piece of land that we're talking about. So the neighbour owns...
Oh, no, apologies, no. So the green boundary of trees indicates the boundary between the edge of the agricultural unit. Right. So this piece, the application site is within the ownership of the farmer, and then this land all to the south, my understanding is within ownership of the owners of the residential properties.
Because it says here in paragraph 43 that the neighbour considers the area to form part of their residential garden, and as such they have used it since they moved in. So I'm a little bit confused. Is that statement saying that the neighbour has had access to this piece of land that we're now discussing?
No, just for clarity, if that's all right, Chairman. So if we look back to paragraph 42, this starts the discussion in terms of Cliff Home and Cliff Home Mews and their curtilage and parkland, and 43 relates back to the parkland area rather than the agricultural area.
Councillor Holt.
Well, how does the neighbour say that they've used it then? How does the neighbour consider it part of theirs and that they use it?
Chairman, perhaps if I can help as well to provide some clarification and reiterate really the points that Mrs. Dodd has made. This is Cliffholm Mews and Cliffholm. Those are the two residential properties adjacent to the site, owned by the same family. Effectively, from the road back along that boundary, is all owned by the owners of these two properties. So, as far as we are concerned, the extent of the residential curtilage is along this line here. This area is owned by these properties, but is used. The consent granted in 1990. Well, the consent granted previously was for creation of a parkland. Now, clearly, that condition, that permission had requirements for retention of boundary treatment between the residential curtilage and the parkland. That's not to say that they can't use it to walk across it and enjoy that as a parkland area, but what we are saying is we do not recognise that as domestic curtilage. This piece of land, which is the piece we're talking about tonight, is not within their ownership. That is owned by the owner of these fields and this yard. That is the piece of land you're talking about tonight for the retention of the hard standing for agricultural purposes. Does that help? Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm interested about the difference between agriculture carried out on the 8 acres, I think was referred to in that immediate locality, and what agricultural contracting is. Because as I understood it, an agricultural contractor will do the ploughing and the harvesting, and will do it around various farms. So it's still agricultural activity, and all agriculture is done at the mercy of the weather. And you know, not every summer's like the one we've just enjoyed. And when the weather is in their favour, they will work all night. And I don't think we should be putting any conditions on that would restrict them from doing that, because you know crops could be lost. So I will support this and propose the recommendation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Smith. Do you, well, I have another speaker indicating.
She needs a seconder at this stage.
Do you have a seconder at this stage? Councillor Thurman, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important for the committee to try to separate some of these issues here. There's clearly a long-standing cause of friction between the residents just to the south and the operation of whether it's the contracting business or the agriculture. Here tonight we're asked to do a very limited thing, which is to give retrospective planning permission to a piece of hard standing that's behind Barnes on the open countryside. I'm reassured by the pictures that the photos rather, that it's very difficult to distinguish where the field ends and where the hard standing begins. This is not visually intrusive, and therefore I've concluded that it doesn't provide any harm to the open nature of the countryside, and therefore I shall be supporting the recommendation as already moved and seconded.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Cumberland.
Can I just come back upon that point? The hard standing will not be clearly defined from that of the rest of the fields. Who is going to ensure that this operation doesn't encroach upon the rest of the fields?
Yes. Would that be? Would it be enforcement?
Yeah.
Mrs. Dodd.
Thank you, Chairman. So in terms of the operation or the use of the site, it still is an agricultural use, so we're not necessarily looking at a use issue. So that agricultural use could indeed extend over all those fields, and you could have ploughs or tractors in a much wider area. In terms of actually looking at the extent of the hard standing. We do have the measurements from the plan, and when you get, I've been onto the site, when you get onto site, it is clearer underfoot where that hard standing lies. So I'm fairly confident we could take measurements to ensure that the hard standing itself doesn't encroach. But I would reiterate that the use is the same use as the rest of the surrounding fields. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Campbell, thank you very Councillor Hetherington.
I would just like to know what the surface is presently on there and how is it going to be retained without spreading out elsewhere. What is the surface presently?
It's a compacted, hardcore sort of crushed stone material that's on there at the moment.
It would lead me to the state that we should be able to define exactly the area that is going to be in that type of material, so it doesn't spread out onto the other 8 acres.
Well, that's noted, I think. Do you want to add anything to that?
Just that it's defined on the red plan.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Stockwood.
Thanks very much. I did listen to the planning officer's explanation of the planning history. I wasn't quite sure that I seem to recall attending committee not last year where planning permission for residential development was granted as described in paragraph 6. So as this site is now in a residential development which is not tied in any way to agricultural use, how are we protecting the residential amenity of the site from passing traffic relating to the agricultural use of that site? And how does the site, the contracting site, the residential residential site and the spread of the contracting site work within the site, please?
That's a very good question.
It's in the papers at number 6.
Did you get that, Mrs. Dodd?
Yes, that is a very good question. So for clarity, the application for the new residential property was in this section of the site at the front here. So if I zoom in, so the site boundary came in front of the existing barn, took in this area that the hedge is no longer on site, but roughly along the area of this hedge and to the front of the site. And this is where the new house was proposed. At the time you considered the application in October of last year, the committee report made reference to the fact that the closest part of the agricultural contracting business, which is this barn, is controlled by the hours condition. And officers and members were satisfied on that basis in terms of the residential amenity of the closest part of the site. In terms of the remainder of the site, it is already in an agricultural use, and it is not to suggest that traffic or use would necessarily increase as a result of that. It isn't a larger agricultural holding or a more intensive agricultural holding. It is simply that the hard standing is to facilitate the access onto the field areas for the more heavy machinery. So I hope that helps to clarify.
Does that help clarify? Oh, thank you. You're very welcome. Councillor Jones.
Given it looks like it's likely to be approved, I thought Councillor Cumberlack made some suggestions about tightening up the recommendations because it was around the word solely for agricultural purposes, and I thought, and it seemed to make some sense, that it was used solely for storage of agricultural equipment, for some words to imply for the use of the farm, and then carrying on to be not for the contractor's business. Is that change possible? And is it acceptable to whoever's moved it and seconded it?
Well, Councillor Smith moved it and Councillor Thurman seconded. What about these condition restrictions?
Yes, Chairman, I think there could be clarity to that condition if members required. in terms of suggesting that we change the wording of the conditions so that it states shall not be used in accordance with the agricultural contracting business and shall solely be used for the storage of implements and access to and in relation to the agricultural holding, if that would be helpful.
I think that would be helpful. Councillor Smith.
I'm not very happy with that. Because if it's only going to be for the storage of ploughs and disc carriers and things like that, they've still got to be picked up by a tractor to be taken off to wherever they want to use them. And I don't see what the difference is between farming on the 8 acres, as I said before, or farming on somebody else's farm or on their 90 acres elsewhere. It's still farming business.
Okay, Mr. Peckham, could you help us on this?
Chairman, yes, just to a certain extent to focus our minds on what this application seeks. It seeks the retention of an area of hard standing, which is not concrete, it's not tarmac, it is, as Mrs. Dodd has explained, it's a crushed aggregate effectively on that area. It's not for a change of use of the land, so arguably, forget that we've got the application at the moment for the hard standing. Clearly it makes it more convenient potentially to store stuff there, but arguably if they were agricultural implements, they could be stored anywhere in this field and picked up by a tractor. So, as I say, just to reiterate, we are dealing with the retention of the hard standing, not for the use of that hard standing. That use could have pre-existed before the hard standing was laid, although, as I say, I will accept that maybe the hard standing makes it more convenient to store those implements there.
So we are only approving the existence of the hard standing, is what you're saying?
Yes, but I think it does give us an opportunity, as we've discussed, to strengthen that condition to ensure that it's not used in connection with the agricultural contractor's business that operates from the front. The only thing that came to mind, Chairman, when I was saying that is that obviously if those implements are used in connection with the agricultural contractor's business, arguably that might restrict the storage on that area. So it is a bit, thinking it through, it's a bit difficult. Clearly agricultural purposes may be a little too wide and too loose. I think clearly the main area of concern, certainly from the neighbouring residents, is the impact of noise, dust and those type of activities. But as I say, the issue is that you could store equipment in that area regardless of whether there is a hard standing there or not.
Councillor Stockwood.
Well, thank you very much. It's my recollection that the applicant's agent did say that it was for two purposes, and that is what the application is for, and therefore, as the applicant is offering it for those two purposes, then it's reasonable to condition it to what the applicant said. And the applicant said it was to fix a problem with the boggy corner, which is the access, and to store ploughs, which is a named agricultural implement. Therefore, the stronger condition is entirely in line with what the applicant's agent said the land was to be used for. So, I mean, I'm only working from the notes I made during the applicant speaking. I'm sure there's an audio recording somewhere. But I think the stronger condition would be very helpful in clarity of what is occurring on the site, because the site is has different planning permissions in different locations and different uses, and it's so some degree of stronger clarity would be beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwood. That's very helpful. Is that helpful? And Councillor Smith and Councillor Thurman, is that helpful? Yeah.
If it means that we're going to restrict the working of the person to do farming, then I'm not in favour of that. But I would not accept that at all, because as Councillor Smith has previously said, they'll have to work when the weather is right, come what may. Be it their own, yes, or if it's contracting, you know, you can't stifle their business by tracking them down to certain hours.
We're not attempting, I'm not aware that the extra stronger condition proposed in any way limits hours of operation. I think it's about making sure that the hard core is for the stated purposes of providing access to the agricultural building, which is what the applicant says, and they've mentioned some element of storing some ploughs, which is what they want to do, and we are the stronger condition allows them to do what they want to do. But
it's fair to assume they probably want some hard. They've got more sheds there, because as everyone well knows, the farming industry is under great from stuff being pinched from the farmyards. I can see why they've got more sheds up to make a better security system. So it's fair to assume that some of the minor stuff is going to be stored outside. I can quite probably see that, but I think that's the reason why they've got more sheds, purely for security.
Right, thank you. Have we got the, I think...
Are they accepting the stronger
yeah,
condition?
so are you accepting the stronger conditions? Yeah, right. Right, okay, well, I think we've had a lot of discussion on this, so I think we better go to a vote with those conditions. No other comments? So we'll have a show of hands, please. Those in favour of the recommendations as moved and seconded, along with the extra conditions. Can I have a show of hands? Those in favour, please. Anyone against? No. So that was good. That's permission granted then. Thank you very much. We've been sitting here for over 2 hours now, and I'm just conscious of the fact it might be getting a bit uncomfortable. Would people like to have a 5-minute comfort break? So we'll have a. Shall we come back at 1:45, please? Thank you.
Jones. We're missing Councillor.
Right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience. You find yourself sort of getting a bit uncomfortable sitting down for so long, so I hope that was helpful. We'll move on to our next application now, please, which is 6 Haileybury Road, West Bridgford. Increase the roof height of the bungalow to create first floor accommodation and external alterations. Mr. Pegram, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, application relates to a residential property on Haileybury Road. I should move over to my other plan as well to pick up the neighbouring streets. Application relates to a bungalow on this site here. Oh look, they're on the screen. Malvern Road here, and the property's fronting Malvern Road, obviously. The proposal, Chairman, is to effectively take the roof off of the building, raise the eaves and ridge height to provide further accommodation at first floor level. This shows you the aerial photograph of the area with the site outlined in red. And then if we look at the photographs, you'll notice, Chairman, that as you move up through Haileybury Road, there is a change in character. The property on the corner of Haileybury Road and Malvern Road is a chalet bungalow with a gable-ended pitched roof. The next one in the line is a chalet bungalow again, but with a hipped roof. And then we have the application property. The application property and beyond are very similar. I won't say identical, but they're obviously built probably by the same builder at the same time, in the same style and height, etc. So, and on the opposite side of the road, you have 2-storey dwellings. That's the application property we're looking at this evening. Garage down the side, that's the hipped roof chalet bungalow you saw in the other picture. That's the relationship between those two properties. And then the relationship with the neighbouring property on Haileybury Road there. That's from the rear. This property has been extended to the rear. We have the benefit of the floor plans, and they show, as long as it hasn't been changed since this, the plans were submitted, show that that is a bathroom window. This is a kitchen window with a door to effectively an open plan room with a window in the rear elevation. Oh, sorry, it's a bit too quick, and that's a bit too close in. Yes, that's the rear elevation of the property, the application property. And then that's looking across southerly to the neighbouring property on Haileybury Road. That's then looking at the relationship at the rear between number 4 and number 6. And then looking across the garden to properties on Malvern Road. And again, slightly spinning around, those are the properties on Malvern Road. I'll highlight this property in a moment, at the moment, Chairman, because we're just going to go inside that property in a moment. That is actually looking from the rear garden of that property, at the rear of number 6. And then the following 2 pictures are taken from within the accommodation of that property on Malvern Road. That one and that one. So that confirms what you've seen in the photographs. That's the existing bungalow with an attached garage. The proposal, as I said, is to take the roof off and raise the roof, resulting in accommodation at first floor level. It raises the eaves, raises the ridge, Chairman, from 4.4 metres to about 6.4 metres, so it's an increase of 2 metres, and it raises the eaves from around about 2.6 to 2.7 metres, depending on where you measure it to 3.5 metres, so it's an increase of around 800 to 900 millimetres. It does change the character and the appearance of that bungalow, undoubtedly, Chairman. There is also an issue of potential overlooking of neighbouring properties, particularly those on Malvern Road at the rear. Just to help with members' decision or consideration of that matter, there was a previous application which involved a higher increase in the roof height, a lot more glazing in the front elevation, and a Juliet balcony on the rear. It's been reduced in height, and the proposal now omits the Juliet balcony, and these are 2 vertical windows serving a bedroom with a panel in the middle, so there's no balcony proposed at the rear now. And just in terms of distances, Chairman, to help you there as well, from the middle of the elevation or the ridge position of that property to the rear of that property on Malvern Road is approximately 24 metres. The distance from the middle of the property to roughly that point on the rear garden is about 16 metres, and then the distance from the middle of that property to the back of that property is about 26 metres. So there is potential for overlooking, Chairman, but given those distances, given that it's a bedroom at first floor, omitting the Juliet balcony, your officers were of the view that that wouldn't result in unacceptable overlooking. There are some roof lights, as you can see, in the side of the building. Most of those would be 1.7 metres above the floor area of the accommodation in the roof, so clearly above general eye level. There is a run of windows there, but they are generally above the stairwell, so again would not result in overlooking to the neighbouring property. I think, Chairman, the main considerations are impact on the amenities of the neighbours, and hopefully that explanation helps you with that particular issue. The other one has to be the impact of the development in the street scene. And as you saw from earlier pictures, this property is very similar to the other bungalows that run up through that street. The difference, Chairman, I think, in terms of your officer's consideration, was that the first 2 properties, I've lost it now, going the wrong way. The first 2 properties in the street are of a different character to the rest of them. If this property were in the middle of that run, I think we might be making a different recommendation. But on balance, Chairman, we believe that because this is at the beginning of the street, it doesn't upset unacceptably that rhythm through that run of bungalows, and on that basis, Chairman, we've put it before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. We have 3 speakers on this item. The first speaker is Mr. Chahal. Who is the applicant, please? Thank you. So as you will see, you've got up to 5 minutes to talk to us. As soon as you're ready, right-hand button, the light will come on and we'll take notes. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, committee. So my name is Rant Chahal. I'm the current owner of 6 Haileybury Road. So I just wanted to go through some of the sort of journey that I've gone on in terms of extending the bungalow. So a bit of a background. So I bought the property in 27th of April from the family of the original owners. Before I purchased the property, it was left empty for several months. It was built in 1964 along with number 2 and number 4 as described, which are chalet bungalows. Number 6, by comparison, is of limited architectural appeal and has not been updated since the 1970s and 80s, and it requires extensive refurbishment. Our home buyer report recognised severe damp problems, asbestos, old electrics and unsafe internal glass. We purchased the property as a long-term family home due to the level of investment required. The decision was taken to extend the property before refurbishing, otherwise it would not be financially viable in the future. Refurbishing and extending was the only way to really get a reasonable property within the Musters ward due to the huge increase in prices. For example, 4-bedroom properties are now circa £550,000. We are currently renting at great expense in Westbridge until work can begin. We did look at many extension options and we employed a local architect called Swish to provide some guidance on extending and renovating. We were advised not to extend to the rear due to the length of the property that would be created. This would cause internal corridor problems, lighting issues and ventilation and heating concerns. The reduction in garden size would not be suitable for a family as the last third of the garden is a lower level due to the rest of the property being on a hill. We were advised not to extend to the side due to the proximity to number 4 Haileybury Road and their extension, reducing the possibility which comes up to the boundary. This would reduce the possibility of windows, reduced light and creating ventilation and heating concerns as previously mentioned. Rooms in the centre of property would also have no windows. We were advised to extend into the attic and create another chalet style bungalow as per number 2 and number 4, as this is the most energy efficient building design for an extension and reduce the carbon footprint and energy of a property on a larger extension in a single floor. This would increase the amount of natural light and passive ventilation and cooling and additional windows and roof lights. This creates a versatile property with bedrooms on the ground floor and first floor and enable us to grow as a family as well as utilising it when we are older. The original submission was put in place in the 4th of May 2017. This was based on 84 Selby Road, which was designed by the same architect, which is the next street along. The design of 6 Haileybury Road was therefore a very similar pattern and scale. This was refused due to scale, expanse and glazing and change of materials would be at odds with the street scene, and the Juliet balcony, as previously mentioned, would be overlooking. Acknowledging the concerns, we engaged the planning officer and made alterations to make it acceptable scale, fenestration and design. We reviewed the local area, street and number 6 Haileybury Road and see what materials were utilised. We assessed methods of removing the overlooking and loss of privacy. As you can see on the next page, we have looked at the local area and seen which bungalows have been converted and what they actually represent. There are a number of local bungalows that have been converted into similar properties with similar design and scale. Our resubmission reworks the plans extensively, significantly reducing the ridge height to reduce the scale. The entrance has moved back to the side in keeping with the existing property, and we have reduced the amount of fenestration at the front. We've redesigned the layout to take into account reduction in attic space. The rear Juliet balcony was removed and replaced with a narrow vertical window to reduce overlooking. The split face cladding has been replaced with wooden cladding, which is already present on the property and properties in the local area. The window colour has changed from black to light grey to create a softer look, taking cues from other local properties. Render was left on the design of the property because it's currently partially rendered, and full rendering will remove damp problems that currently exist. Current concerns and objections have been listened to, and we have made various views, and we believe that now current objections are not material to planning concerns. These include loss of views, loss of light, and loss of a valued bungalow as the property remained vacant for much time. There should be no overlooking in the revised plans, and based on other bungalows of similar size, we don't believe it's overdevelopment. There are some further details about how it adheres to the planning policy. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Trejo. Bang on 5 minutes, so it's not easy, I know, when you have to watch a clock as well. So thank you for that. We have another speaker as well. We have Mr. Ian Jones, who is speaking to object to the application. So, more reading material. Yes, it is. It is.
We'll share.
No, that's fine. Oh, yeah. Very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. So, as you will have seen, your 5 minutes will start for. Oh, right. Yes. As soon as you're ready to speak to us, press the right-hand button. The red light will. The right-hand one. The right one. Yeah. Could you? Yeah. We'll come and do it. I'm sorry, I hadn't realised. And then you have up to 5 minutes. 5 minutes to talk to us.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Cavini of bungalow number 8, the closest bungalow, has asked me to talk on her behalf and the other residents. We've canvassed the opinion of 35 affected local residents who have signed the attached document, and they argue that much more in-depth analysis is required as to the effect on the street scene and the character of the road, also the overbearing nature and loss of natural light to neighbouring properties, especially the closest neighbour, bungalow number 8. Residents feel the numerous crucial points below have not yet been fully taken into account or taken into account at all. The residents feel it is fair and reasonable that these new issues be properly and thoroughly investigated and taken into account. We'd like to look at the proximity of number 6 bungalow to bungalow number 8 and the weighting of the final adjudication decision. The proposed development is much closer to bungalow number 8 than any other property. Therefore, the relationship with the low-level bungalow number 8 outweighs the relationship it has with the dormer bungalow number 4. Any analysis should, in our opinion, take into account that the overriding factor is how this development relates to bungalow number 8. When the final adjudication is made, more weight should be given to the proposed development's close proximity and height relationship with bungalow number 8 than that of the more distant number 4. Number 1, the proposed development creates a property that presents a facade and appearance of a 2-storey house to the street scene. All the other bungalows on that side of the road present an appearance and a facade of a bungalow. We think this contravenes local planning policy number 10. Number 2, refer to photograph 1. Bungalow number 6 protrudes approximately 2 metres further forward into the street scene than any other similar bungalows on the road. Raising the height and creating a large expansive roof will be clearly visible looking laterally along the road and will totally disrupt the character and the street scene. See photograph number 2. The proposed development is not sympathetic to neighbouring properties, particularly its closest neighbour, bungalow number 8. It creates the facade of a 2-storey house adjacent to a single-storey bungalow, which would create 2 properties that sit very close together, which would be very different to each other in size, scale and appearance. We think this contravenes local planning policy GP2. The proposed application creates an over-intensive form of a development which very much overbears and dwarfs the neighbouring bungalows, especially its closest neighbour at number 8. We think this contravenes planning policy GP2. And The increase in height of this bungalow will take natural light away from neighbouring properties, especially through the winter months when the sun tracks low in the sky. For the winter months, the natural light getting to the bungalow number 4 and those lower on Malvern Road will be restricted and have a direct impact on their quality of life. We believe this contravenes planning policy GP2. The immediate neighbours and the entire affected community of Haileybury and Malvern Roads urge the applicants to create their dream property, expanding the footprint of the bungalow both sideways and rear to create a superb residence without raising the height. Doing so would create so much goodwill and harmony within the local community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, and well done within your time as well. That was very good. So thank you. Thank you. Right, we have one more speaker on this item, and this is one of the ward members, Councillor Jones. No relation, I'm told. So, and again, up to 5 minutes, please.
Yes, I'm grateful for my namesake for having included photo 3, which is notably missing from the presentation. This application would change a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom bungalow into a house of 5 bedrooms, or 4 and 1 playroom, and 3 bathrooms. The consequence is a loss of a valued bungalow. I understand that, contrary to common sense and the needs of an ageing population, that there are no planning rules protecting bungalows. This application is a step back from an earlier gross application. It has improved the rear of the application, but it does not make it any more accessible. The problem remains at the front and the sides. In the report, the first part of the grounds set out in paragraph 5 for the previous refusal remain relevant in my view. The report at paragraph 19 says it is not considered, and it's clearly a matter of value judgment about the weight given to appearance and dominance. The builder who built this long row of bungalows left a plot on the corner where he later built number 2 and number 4 with their dormers for his family. Number 2 and number 4 on the corner are the only exceptions to a very, very long row of similar bungalows, and it's a very similar row of bungalows on Malvern Malvern Road. All the other bungalows along that row are of a similar bungalow type height. In appearance, they're predominantly brick with a small balancing mix of white render and brown stonework and white window frames. They are all of a very distinct design. The application proposes a church-like front with grey window frames, grey gutters, grey slate roof, and with wooden cladding and white render around the property. The application property sticks out further at the front from all the others. You've heard that comment. It's certainly over 1 metre on one side and 2 metres at another. The report does not mention this. Protruding forward from the line of the other properties is what makes the proposed front and ridge height of this proposal more stark and more dominant. Where there is a next to unnoticeable slight rise going up Haileybury, the application property is set much higher at the rear than the bungalows on Malvern. I object to this proposal on the basis that the design is at odds with the established character of this area of the road and would be harmful to the street scene in appearance. Specifically, the appearance of the front is totally out of character with the street scene and adjacent property in its style, range of windows, white render, areas of cladding and greyness. This dominant frontage would be conspicuous by its protrusion further than the line of all the other bungalows. The ridge height of 6.48 metres is higher even than the neighbouring dormer bungalows, and the ridge runs from front to back. This increased height would give it a dominance which is out of character with the area of this run of bungalows. I suggest to the committee that the reason this proposal is contrary to Policy 10 is because it does not make a positive contribution to the public realm and sense of place and does not reinforce valued local characteristics. It's contrary to Policy GP2 mentioned in paragraph 12 of your report, in that, in my view, the scale, the height, the design and the materials are not sympathetic to the character and appearance of the neighbouring properties. In summary, this is an overdevelopment of a property upwards. It is not in keeping with or respecting the neighbouring properties and is out of keeping with the character of the area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Within 5 minutes again. So we heard from Mr. Chahal, who's the applicant, was explaining some background to the application and his hopes for it. Mr. Jones, as an objector, was explaining his worry about the street scene in particular and the impact on the neighbouring property, as indeed was Councillor Jones. Mr. Pegram, could you pick up on those, please?
In part, Chairman, yes. I think I talked you through the distances to the rear and the impact on neighbouring properties. I would always say, and I always advise my staff, all development has some impact. The job of this, of the authority and this committee, as I think Councillor Edwards alluded to, is to adjudicate on those issues and to determine when those impacts become unacceptable and warrant refusal. In this instance, Chairman, your officers, after careful consideration, did not consider those impacts were so significant as to warrant refusal. It does result in a different design of property, and as I did say in my initial presentation at the beginning, if this bungalow was in the middle of that run, I think we would be recommending refusal to you. But because it sits at the beginning of that run, effectively you'd end up with 3 properties at the beginning of the street which are different to the other ones beyond it, and for that reason, on balance, we recommended approval. I do just want to, and although Mr. Jones didn't read it out, Chairman, it is in writing, it is before you, and I just want to pick up on one of the points that he made in his written submission on page 2 of 2, point 6. There are some concerns there raised about what the applicant's architect has included on his website, about what he calls an invaluable relationship with the planning office. Clearly, Chair, we don't have control over what the architect puts on his website. That's the first point. The other issue is he talks about a 97% success rate. The NPPF does encourage us to engage with applicants and architects at an early stage. It encourages pre-application discussions, and it does encourage us to try and resolve issues before an application is submitted. That might explain his high success rate. However, Chairman, although it might not be, the way it's worded might not be seen as it says, unhelpful language by Mr. Jones, as I say, all of those are almost in accordance with the NPPF in terms of working with applicants and agents. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. So I think we've picked up on the points there, and thank you for the explanation. Who would like to start on this, please? Councillor Cumberlack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm afraid I have to say I agree there is room for upgrading the bungalow, particularly in view of the latest thermal technologies, etc. However, I feel the impact on the street scene would diminish the existing bungalows by its dominance and appearance, which is out of character with the remaining properties. I therefore don't think that it is acceptable, and if I quote what is said at paragraph 9, paragraph 130 of the NPPF states that permission should be refused for development of poor design. I'm not saying this is poor design, but that it takes that fails to take opportunities available for improving the character and quality of an area and the way it functions. I feel this does not take that opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cumberlack. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I went out yesterday and had a good look along Haileybury Road and Malvern Road at this. The properties at numbers 2 and 4 are clearly still bungalows. They're dormer bungalows, chalet bungalows, but they're clearly still bungalows. What is being proposed is very clearly not a bungalow, it is a house. And therefore, the point that Mr. Pegram was making about 3 different properties at one end not impacting on the properties further along, I didn't feel that that had a strong force of an argument, because we've got 2 bungalows, a house, and then a lot of other bungalows. I'm grateful to the to Mr. Jones, I think, for photo 2. I hadn't fully appreciated, even on a site visit, the difference in how further forward on the site number 6 is compared to number 8. And that therefore putting a house on that footprint would have a seriously overbearing impact on that house. Therefore, Chair, I haven't got the exact words, I don't think, but I would like to move a motion to refuse permission on the grounds that the impact of the proposed house would be over-dominant on number 8, Haileybury Road, and that by putting a house in a long row of bungalows would be harmful to the street scene because of its scale, height and design. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Just writing that down. Do you have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Donoghue.
I'll second that motion, Councillor Edwards, and for the reasons you've stated, that although that I'm sympathetic to why the officers may have passed it, it is the first bungalow of a road that's set forward, and the impact and the actual design is not sympathetic to the existing residents. So on that, I will second the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donoghue. Mr. Pegram, did you want to just...
Yes, please, Chairman. Just before we proceed with the debate on that basis, can I draw members' attention, and certainly the mover and the seconder, to page 66, paragraph 5, point 1, which was the previous reason for refusal, albeit slightly higher scheme, and I think this was also alluded to by Councillor Jones in suggesting that that reason was still a valid reason for refusal. That one does deal with the issues of creating first floor accommodation. Maybe we need to think about expansive glazing if members are still minded to refuse on that basis. Refuse because the glazing has been reduced. But it does talk about what Councillor Edwards was suggesting would significantly alter the appearance of the existing bungalow to such a degree it would appear at odds with the established character. Clearly, I'm not saying I agree with that view. We have recommended approval as officers, but I think that covers the points that Councillor Edwards was raising. The one point I'd seek clarification on is the issue of overbearing. Overbearing on what, in terms of an overbearing impact on number 8 in particular?
So what sort of overbearing on number 8?
Because of the height and scale. I mean, this is raising the ridge height by 2 metres. I think that's correct. I think I got that right. The ridge height is 2 metres higher. That's a significant increase overlooking, directly adjacent to a bungalow.
Further clarification, sorry Chairman, I need to be clear on this if members were minded to refuse, because clearly we need to be clear about any appeal that we'd have to defend. There's 2 aspects potentially to overbearing, and I think in terms of what Councillor Edwards is saying. One again relates to the appearance of the building in the street scene and the fact that it might appear again at odds or overbearing with its neighbours. The other use of the word overbearing could be where, for instance, if you were stood in a garden and there was a big extension next door, clearly that could appear overbearing to you. It does project slightly forward, and as you can see from the photograph number 2 that Mr. Jones handed out, there is a window there, but your officer's view would be very difficult to justify an overbearing impact on, albeit a very small projection forward on that property, particularly given this is front garden. So I just wanted to see clarification, Chairman, of the mover. Is it overbearing in terms of the street scene appearance or overbearing in terms of the amenities of the neighbour?
I'm grateful for Mr. Pegram differentiating between those because it helped clear my thinking. It's overbearing in terms of the street scene.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Hole.
Thank you, Chair. I know Mr. Pegram is going to say we can't look at this, but I'm just concerned that if this particular application is approved, there's going to be a domino effect all the way down. And I know we can't take that into consideration at all, but please bear in mind that I'm not saying that the other bungalows will do the same as this, but the next time the next bungalow comes up for approval, you're going to say, right, okay, well, there's number 2, number 4, and now number 6. What's to stop number 8 to putting in an application and getting approval for it? And then gradually, you've got this domino effect all the way down the street scene. That what actually shouldn't inhibit this particular application. But I do feel that this one, in particular, is not in keeping with the whole character of the whole street. So let's look at it as a whole, not just at the beginning, not just at the end. Look at the whole. Look at all those bungalows in that street, and just think about if you turn this one into a house, as Councillor Edwards say, you've got 2 bungalows, albeit chalet, then a house, and then you've got bungalows. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hole. Well, you're absolutely right. Mr. Pegram will no doubt say what I'm saying as well, that it's very tempting to think what might happen to other houses down the road, but one can't speculate on future applications. We can only talk about the application that we're looking at today, and I know you do appreciate that, but you have made your point very clearly. Do you want to add anything to that, Mr. Pegram?
I think, like Councillor Stockwood earlier this evening, Chairman, you've done my job for me. Sorry. Like Councillor Stockwood earlier this evening, you've done my job for me.
I like to have my uses. Do we have any other speakers on this? We've had it was has it been it was
yes.
Yes, so it's a proposal.
Refusal
So it's right. So any other speakers on this? We've got the yes.
On the reason, Chairman.
Yes. So we've got the proposal to refuse permission, which is against the printed recommendation, but we need to be clear on the reasons for refusal. So on clarity for that, please. So, who would? It was Councillor Edwards. If you want to clarify the reasons for recommending refusal, please.
My understanding, Chair, is that we only need one material reason, and I think I provided that. The danger of trying to overload it is that you're not, to an outside objective look, that you're not basing that on reason. I'm happy to leave it as where I am.
Mr. Pegram.
Sorry, Chair, I wasn't asking Councillor Edwards to expand on it. I just wanted clarity about what the reason was, and whether, as I suggested and Councillor Jones suggested earlier, whether it's basically reason 1 with a few tweaks to it that is on page 66.
Yes, I'm all for what has already been established as a reason, as long as that, yes, harmful to the appearance of the street scene is crucial in that.
Chairman, I think to help members perhaps and in that, I wasn't looking for Councillor Edwards to expand, and indeed this is a resubmission of a previous scheme, albeit slightly lower, and I think to add additional reasons over and above perhaps what is in number 1 could be a recipe for disaster at appeal, potentially in terms of any cost award. Number 2 clearly has been resolved by the removal of the Juliet balcony, because there is no Juliet balcony. So I think if members are minded to refuse, the focus should be on number 1.
Are you happy with that?
Absolutely happy, thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So we're clear on the recommendation that's been moved and seconded to refuse permission for the reasons given, and so this is what we're going to take a vote on now. So those in favour of refusal of permission for the reasons shown, please show your hands. One, two, three, four, five, six. So, and those against? 2. So therefore, permission is refused for this this application as in the report. So thank you very much. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your input to the meeting. Right. So this again is the, oh sorry, Councillor Jones, yes, please rejoin us. So, we're just doing musical chairs again. So we'll move on to 2 Bishops Road, Bingham. And this is a 2-storey side extension. Mrs. Dodd, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So as you say, we now move to Bingham, to a residential housing area and an estate of similar age and appearance houses that's constructed in Bingham. It's outside of the conservation area, and to give a bit of context, if I move to the aerial, the railway line runs along to the north here, and as I say, there's a large area of housing, residential area. This is the application site, so it's a end of terrace 2-storey property, and the garage here also belongs to the application site, and it extends up to this fence boundary here. The application site is on the end of the row, on the corner of the street. Nearest neighbouring property is this one, which is on the end of a row at right angles to the application site. This is number 19 Hill Drive, which is referenced in the report. You can see here there's an existing garage, existing gable end with windows in it. We're now at the rear of the application site, so we're just looking at the back of the garage and the side of the existing property, and another one showing the rear of the existing property with a small single-storey extension that's already in place. Case officer has visited the neighbour at 19 Hill Drive, and this is a photograph taken from their garden. What might be clear from that is that there is a slight change of level, so 19 Hill Drive is slightly lower than the application site on 2 Bishops Road, and you can see there the view from that neighbour's windows towards the application site. And then a further view from the side garden. Bishops Road is running along the left-hand side here, so this is the front of the application site and the side of the neighbouring property. And then this photograph here just really demonstrates the relationship again between those 2 neighbouring properties. 19 Hill Drive has a slightly unusual layout in that the main habitable room windows to the bedrooms are on the side and the front, and the 2 rear-facing first-floor windows are, as I understand it, the bathroom and landing. So the application that is before us is to remove that existing single-storey garage and construct a 2-storey side extension on roughly a similar footprint. The proposed side extension wouldn't have any gable end windows, so there would be fewer windows on that elevation. And if we look, you can see windows are facing front and rear at first floor and ground floor. If I just go back to this plan, Chairman, which shows in red where the extension would be situated, it shows a little bit better that relationship between the nearest neighbouring property. Officers have considered it on the basis of predominantly of residential amenity, and we are satisfied that although it is in fairly close proximity to this neighbour's rear boundary, the slightly unusual window relationship and this sort of offset between the rear elevation and the side of the proposed extension is such that there wouldn't be a significantly detrimental impact on neighbouring amenity. Consider the design to be in keeping with the surrounding area and the terrace of existing properties. And overall, Chairman, on balance, officers are recommending approval to this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Dodd. We have two speakers on this item. The first speaker is Christina Panku. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. All right. Please don't worry. It's you just tell us. You can tell us what you want to tell us, and we will listen carefully. I assure you. But yeah. So as soon as you're ready, the right-hand button, the red light will come on, and then you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, as I say, I don't have any of this. What I did do was take some copies of a drawing showing all additions onto 2 Bishops Road here. I've got enough for everybody, but shall I pass them around? It just actually shows it on the plan, because when you actually look at 2 Bishops Road, you're actually seeing the original dwelling.
I think if you want to pass it, we'll look at it while you're talking to us. Yes.
It looks so inoffensive.
Yes. Okay. So
Okay.
if you start telling us what you'd like to tell us.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I think it's only fair that we start the clock again.
Oh, thank you so much.
We will start.
Yes,
the clock
they are.
again,
And
yes.
there is an error on one. It says there's
When she's ready.
it says something 2 foot the height. It should have been a 3 there. As I say, this is a rush job.
Thank you.
And my mum still
Well,
hasn't
no.
had notification of the committee.
Don't worry, you're not eating into your time. So
Okay,
we'll just sit down again and we'll look at these while you're talking to us. So
thank you.
Okay, your 5 minutes will start when you start talking.
Thank you.
No, press the button again. Press the button. Put the red light on, please. Yes. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm here on behalf of my mum, really. She's been in that house since it was built. She's 92. She has a tiny rear garden, which she appreciates much because of the privacy more than anything. The side garden is very much open to the public as such. It looks enormous on these photographs. When you stand at Mum's back door and imagine what would be there, you would have to crane your neck upwards, the sheer height. That you just can't get the gist from a photo. There is already above, from the back of the property, that is well visible above Mum's. If that extension is built 2 stories high, it's already 3 foot higher than my mum's. if you imagine an overwhelming expanse of brick that will be visible to her on both sides, not just the side of the extension, it will be also on that side, which has a window, which will also have sight of my mum's lounge when people are coming into the bedroom. Mum actually sits in this corner, which you can't see. She gets sun in the morning, and in the evening, or during the day, if it's too hot, she sits there out of the sun, which is very important, and it's the only private place she can sit. Again, looking at this, I can't imagine anybody understanding. It looks so absolutely harmless from everything I've seen on the plan. At present, there is a garage there, a prefab garage. That's butting right up to the fence. It discharges water all over Mum's back garden. Directly, there's part of the gutter pipe missing. They can't fit it on because it's straight up to the boundary, which incidentally is not the legal boundary. I do know that's not a planning matter, but that's something I need to resolve. That is actually on Mum's property, as is. Now, where do I start? I don't want to lose my string. I'm really struggling here. There's already been development there. I'll start with the front, actually, which does have planning. It's not really a porch. It's completely out of keeping with the rest of the row. It's huge. There was a small storm porch there originally. And from the side, it's actually, believe it or not, 90 square feet internally. That is completely outside of the building line, the accepted one for the whole of the estate. Also to the rear, the buildings I mentioned that look miles away, you can see, which it would have a wraparound effect. The extension in its huge enormity and overbearingness, plus the house, which wasn't a problem, and then the bit that already goes across the back of the garden, which I do not believe even had planning permission. I have some measurements here. My husband scaled them from existing information that I will read out to you. Now, the other extensions that have been added to the property, at the rear, there's circa 205 square foot. I'm sorry it's in feet. At present, it's a single-storey flat roof, visible above and across the fence of 19 Hill Drive. And we don't believe it has planning permission at all. Plus, the front porch, as I mentioned before, 90 square foot. The total of both of these is almost 300 square feet already. To date, added together, an increase of 75% of the original footprint already. Does not include the prefab garage at all. Proposed extension would increase this to a further 225 square feet, a total increase of 110% from the original footprint. And now this is all crept in and added on, and you know, it could even be joined up from the front porch to that extension as well at the front, because it's now set a precedent at the front. The porch, should I say, has now probably been the building line, which is a slight worry. The estate, really, how it's built.
Okay, I have to stop you there.
Sorry that went so fast.
Oh, you're right. Once you start, you
I
don't
can't
realise
believe
where time
that. I
goes.
have one sheet here.
But thank you very much for your comments.
I hope that's enough for you to...
You have given us some very useful points.
Do I switch anything off? Do you do that?
If you would just press the button again. So
the right or the left one?
The right-hand one.
Thank you.
Marvellous. Thank you very much. So thank you. I know it's not easy to talk to us. Our next speaker is one of the ward members, please, Councillor John Stockwood. I don't need to tell you how to use a microphone, do I? And you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Hill Drive and Bishops Road are both part of the wider estate built in the 1950s and the dwellings in the estate are all very similar, very compact and closely terraced. As seen on the location map with the agenda papers, a little character is added to the street scene by turning some end terrace houses sideways. This can be seen on the opposite side of the road to the application, where 17 Hill Drive is a deeper property in the terrace because it is turned sideways to Hill Drive so that its front door faces Bishop's Road. In this way, 17 Hill Drive and 1 Bishop's Road both have front doors facing Bishop's Road and have a relationship of side-by-side properties. This contrasts with the application property, 2 Bishop's Road and 19 Hill Drive, which are properties at corner angles to each other. The issue of overbearing comes about because of the application design extending into the corner towards 19 Hill Drive. Paragraph 20 acknowledges that the impact of the extension is increased because 2 Bishop's Road is on higher ground above 19 Hill Drive. Paragraph 21 reports to you the clear concerns of the neighbour of overbearing on a home and small rear garden. I agree with paragraph 25 that it acknowledges that this is a very finely balanced application and there are clearly recognised concerns from the neighbour. When this estate was built, the houses had the latest modern facilities. In the 1950s, this meant that modern facilities were indoor toilets, and this estate was an example of better quality housing that was superior to the slums in Bingham that were being cleared at the time. I understand that newer residents in the estate want to develop their properties to more current standards of space and facility. However, those developing property must consider the impact on neighbours. In this case, there is overbearing and a reduction in the residential amenity of the property on 19 Hill Drive. As a committee, you will have heard people explain that they want to build their forever home, the home that they want to live in forever. I understand that the neighbouring resident, 19 Hill Drive, has lived in 19 Hill Drive since it was built in the 1950s. This is the home where she raised her daughter, who has presented her concerns this evening. Today, at 92 years young, she is asking not to build a new forever home, but to allow her to continue to enjoy the home she has lived in all these years. She is asking for you to protect the level of amenity she has enjoyed all these years. I thank the planning officer for visiting 9 Hill Drive, and I welcome efforts made to speak to the neighbour to understand her concerns. This evening I wish that the committee give thorough consideration to the strong concerns of the neighbour before deciding this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stockwood. Thank you. So, Mrs. Dodd, would you like to comment, please, on the both comments of objection from the daughter of the neighbour and Councillor Stockwood, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The only comment I really wish to add was just to clarify the planning history for members. So in terms of the front porch, just to confirm that did have planning permission back in 2016. The rear extensions, from the photographs, I would assess them to be permitted development, which would be why there wasn't a planning application for them. But I don't think there's anything further I need to clarify on either of the speakers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Dodd. So who would like to, Councillor Edwards would like to start on this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Could we have up the photo taken in the back garden of 19, looking at number 2? No, there's another one, isn't there? That's right. Yes, thank you. Could I just ask, is the photographer standing pretty well against the rear wall of the house of number 19?
I think from looking at the photograph, the case officer is just inside the door. You've got the frame here, so just inside looking out.
Oh, I see. Yes, good. Thank you. So, and if the extension were to be built as on the plans, what would be the separation distance between that back door and the nearest point of the extension?
So the distance to the boundary is 6 metres. So from this point to this point, the back door is slightly set in, so slightly more than 6 metres.
Could I also ask, Chair, as the plans are out, sorry, going back to the photo, please, that we had before. It appears from that photo that there is quite some difference in levels between the level of the garden of number 19 and the level of the house on Bishop's Road. If that, if the extension were to be built as proposed, what would be the height from the bottom of the garden there, which will pretty well abut the boundary will be right on there, to the ridge height?
I'm afraid I don't have an exact plan showing the change of levels between the application site and the neighbouring property. However, I think when you look at this photograph, you can clearly see the bottom of the fence here with the concrete retaining panel. So,
Sorry,
so it's 7.3 metres from the application site ground level to the ridge, plus this additional area here, which I think the speaker advised was around 300 millimetres or a foot. Sorry, can't you hear me? Sorry, so I don't have an exact plan showing the change in levels between application site and neighbouring property. The height to the ridge from the application site is 7.3 metres. I think when you look at this, you can see from the fence there's clearly a retaining concrete section here, which is where the levels change. And I think the objector in her when she made her comments earlier said this was around 300 millimetres, so around a foot added on to your 7.3 metre ridge height. I hope that helps.
Sorry, Chair, just taking those two things together, we're being asked to consider an extension which will be approximately 8 metres high, which is only a separation distance of 6 metres from the back door of the house. Now, I don't want to form a preliminary view, but I'd welcome colleagues' views on whether that is acceptable for an extension. Sorry, I have formed a view. My view is that that isn't, and I found the officer's report extremely good because paragraph 25 says this is a very finely balanced application, and I understand that. And I also looked at paragraph 31 that the officers had approached the applicant's agent suggesting, you might want to rethink, and for me it's a matter of regret that that agent hasn't taken that pretty strong hint to do that. So listening very carefully to the objector and to the ward member, I would move a refusal of planning permission on 2 grounds: that the extension would be overbearing on the home and garden of number 19 Hill Drive, and that would severely impact, and it would produce a reduction in the residential amenity of 19 Hill Drive. Thank you. I move that.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I think we've got a note of those. Do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Hull, I think I saw your hand go up. You're seconding that. Now, also, Councillor Hull, you indicated to speak, so would you like to speak now, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's difficult when you look at photographs and trying to make make a judgment, but I don't think you can be under any illusion that you can see that the level, you step down from that door to the grass. I don't know how far it is to go down, but the indication the officer has mentioned is on that 6-foot panel plus the concrete plinth. And if you can just imagine somebody sitting, not standing, but sitting in a chair on that grass and looking up just a few metres away to a ridge height, as is on the plans. I think this is totally, totally out of keeping in the character of this particular house. And I know this is the council estate and a lot of people have bought their properties, and I do understand that, but regardless of the length of service of the resident, and that you can take that into consideration, that's not a planning consideration, but however, whoever was living in that property, to have that huge 2-storey, single storey, I don't think it would be too bad because it would be about the level of that garage. But this is a 2-storey extension, and whoever's sitting down here is literally looking right up. And I'm happy to second the motion to refuse. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hull. I don't think we need to come back on that. Councillor Jones, you indicated to speak.
I think I won't say much, but I thought the report was very fair because it did actually say that it exacerbated the difference of levels, exacerbated the effect of the proposed, that it would have had some impact on the amenities. So it's just a matter of judgment. It's finely balanced. There would be some overshadowing. So I do support all the grounds that Councillor Edwards recommended refusal on.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak on this, or shall we come towards a conclusion? I think I'm getting a feeling here that we know where we're going with this one. So, Mrs. Dodd, do you want to just come back on any points, or shall I go to a... No, there's nothing to add really, is there? So, right. Oh, yeah. So we've had we've discussed the application, and we've got a recommendation and seconded recommendation to refuse permission. Are we clear on the reasons for refusal? It's the impact on overbearing on the neighbouring property. And the consequential adverse effect on neighbouring amenities. So if we're all clear for that, can I have a show of hands, those in favour of the recommendation to refuse, please? I think that's unanimous. So permission is refused as per the report. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, Councillor Stockwood, and a Merry Christmas to you as well. Right, we'll go on. Right, on to our final application. I'll remind we have a cut-off time of 10 o'clock. We could extend, but we'll see how it goes. 48 Hill Drive, Bingham, single-storey rear extension. Mrs. Dodd, please.
Thank you, Chairman. For this application, we're in a similar area of Bingham. Oh, apologies, this is my IT skills letting us down. So we're still on the same estate, just on a different road in the estate. So you'll see from the aerial, and there's the railway line I spoke of earlier, and you'll see the house types very similar to the ones we've just looked at. And current application is for a single-storey extension at the rear. So my photographs are focusing on the rear of the property. This is the application site, 48 Hill Drive. And then this just shows you the boundary treatment with the neighbouring property number 50 and their downstairs rooms. And then looking the other way to 46, they've got a hedge boundary here that's fairly robust. And looking down the garden of 48 Hill Drive towards the rear boundary. And then we move on to the plans. The application, Chairman, is for single-storey rear extensions on a mid-terrace property. It's slightly unusual shape in that it comes off the rear of the lounge here to provide bedroom accommodation, and then steps in from both boundaries to provide a shower room, an accessible bedroom and shower room. The overall length is 6.7 metres, but as I say, it is stepped in from the boundary on both sides once we reach the end of this bedroom area. I think officers accept that there may be some overshadowing as a result of the extension on this neighbouring window here, which I showed you in the photographs. However, when we've assessed it, we've considered the orientation of the property and also what the fallback position might be under permitted development, and on balance have come to the conclusion that it wouldn't be significantly detrimental to the amenities of this neighbour. Similarly, the neighbour to the other side, the extension is well set in from the boundary and therefore would have limited effects on the neighbour to this side. On this basis, Chairman, your officers are recommending approval to this application, subject to the conditions on page 86 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dodd. We don't have any speakers on this, so who would like to start on this, please? Councillor Jones.
It seems to me that the main issue is the length of the extension that abuts the neighbour and how close to the boundary that length of extension is. Because it's pretty much a long dog leg, isn't it? So can we know what the length of the main bit abutting next doors is, and whether there's a gap, basically, between that wall and the boundary?
If I just answer that now, so this part of the extension here, next to the boundary, is around 4 metres in length, and it's set in 170 millimetres from the boundary.
How much?
170 millimetres. 17
centimetres from the boundary. Is that yes?
Sorry, just while we're on that, what's the height of the extension?
Eight, 9.
Councillor Smith.
It's a quick question. Oh, sorry. What happened then? Just a quick question. I noticed it was quite a long garden. How much amenity space will be left if this is built? If it's deemed acceptable, I'd be happy to move the recommendation.
Is there a ruling on how near you can build to your boundary? I understand that they have to have the gutters on the side of the extension, so the gutters must not protrude into the neighbouring property and therefore can butt up to the boundary, but only the guttering and the downpipes. Is that correct?
Yes, so for clarity, if the guttering or downpipes were to go over the boundary, they effectively need to serve notice on that neighbour and include it in their application site. The way this extension has been designed would be so that those didn't overhang. We've just measured the garden. It's 16 metres in length in total.
Total?
16... Just pressing something. Is 16 metres the existing length of the garden or the length of the garden from that extension?
Sorry, that's the total length of the garden. The extension extends to 6.7 to its furthest point. So you're looking at garden remaining around 9.3 metres in length. The Borough Council's Residential Design Guide, which is guidance, suggests a distance of 10 metres to a rear boundary for new build properties. So,
Which could extend.
Is that helpful?
There's a bit extra on the other side, isn't there, behind the shower room as well. No, I'll move the recommendation.
Right, so Councillor Smith is moving the recommendation as per the report. Do you have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Edwards, you're happy to second that as per the report. Do we have any other speakers on this item? No changes to the recommendation, so we'll go to the vote. I think there's nothing else to add, is there, Mrs. Dolan and Mr. Pegram? So can we have a show of hands? Those in favour of the application, please show. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And those against? 2. So permission is granted as per the report. But thank you for your observations. That's the final item on tonight's agenda. We've just got up to 10 o'clock, so thank you. I'm sorry it went on a long time, but it's very important items on the agenda tonight. Thank you for your cooperation. And this is the last meeting of the year, isn't it? So final meeting before Christmas. So happy Christmas, everybody. Happy New Year. Safe journeys home. And we hopefully look forward to productive meetings in the new year. Thank you.